Rules Committee will come to order. We're awaiting the arrival of the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and I was told he was going to be here in a couple of minutes, and that was about 8 minutes ago. I've been looking at my watch. So we are anxiously awaiting his arrival, and let me say that we're here for consideration of two measures, H.R. 8 from the Ways and Means Committee and the Budget Committee, and H.R. 6109, which we, as members of the Rules Committee, as you all know, last week reported out. Before we begin, I'd like to note that Celeste West, who has for a quarter of a century served valiantly on the Rules Committee staff, is going to be heading into a well-deserved retirement. And everyone knows Celeste, who has made sure that everything runs smoothly up here. And it does thanks to her. And in fact, she makes sure that cell phones never go off, among other things. So that's among Celeste's responsibilities. But I just want to wish Celeste well and to say congratulations and thanks for your many, many years of service to the Rules Committee, Celeste. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Ms.
may,
Slaughter.
if I could take a moment just to add to your best wishes for Celeste, we would like to do that as well. Celeste has always met us all with a great smile, friendship, and we're going to miss her terribly. And I always feel awful when that much institutional memory leaves the Rules Committee.
Wait
Best
till I
of
leave.
everything, Celeste.
Thank you, Celeste. Thank you very much. Well, why don't we proceed? Again, we're awaiting the arrival of the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. We're very happy to have the patient ranking member, my good friend Mr. Levin, here. And so why don't we begin with your testimony, and then we'll go to the chairman when he arrives.
Thank you. Hello to everybody. Let me make a couple of points. First of all, I would ask this committee to provide a rule that would make in order my amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 8 and provide the necessary waivers. I think you know that the Republican leadership has promised us in the minority to allow a vote on such a substitute, and I hope that the committee will make good on that promise. Last week the Speaker said, and I quote, "If our Democratic colleagues want to offer the President's plan or the Senate Democrat plan, we're more than happy to give them the vote." And then last week in an exchange between our minority whip and Mr. Cantor said this, "Mr. Speaker, I will say back to the gentleman," that's Mr. Hoyer, "we do expect and our intention is to allow your tax bill to be made in order. I don't understand, Mr. Speaker, how many more times I have to say that. The Speaker has always represented that we're going to work towards an open process." Okay, I'll get closer to the mic. You know, it's not very loud.
Dave, please. We've been.
Hey, David.
Let me welcome the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee here, and first say it's always a thrill to have you before the Rules Committee, and we know you're going through some health challenges right now, as you and I discussed over the weekend, and I know I speak in behalf of both Democrats and Republicans on this committee and the full House.
Well, thank you.
Some prayers are with you. You know that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, thank you, Louise.
Mr. Levin just began by making a request that we hope very much to be able to make an order in this committee, and that is a desire to, for the first time since 1999, when our party was last in the majority, provide waivers for a substitute. So it's been a long time since a substitute on a bill like this has been made in order, providing the necessary waivers for it. And it is true, I'm going to ask this committee to do that, and I hope very much that we'll be able to. Why don't we take the testimony of...
please, thank you for your comment, Mr. Chairman. Go first.
What did you know that?
We said hello earlier today.
Yes, we did. Well, thank you.
Is your microphone on there?
I think it is. It may be deja vu all over again, but we don't have to do the same thing all over again. This year is the third time in the last 5 years that core tax rates on individual or investment incomes have been scheduled to expire. So that's no way to run a country, and it's certainly no way to run the economy. And while Congress should once again act to stop the tax hike, we should also take this opportunity to finally get serious about tax reform that makes the code simpler and fairer, which could lead to the creation of more than 1 million jobs in the first year alone. The Job Protection and Recession Prevention Act, H.R. 8, provides a one-year extension of the low tax policies originally enacted in 2001 and 2003, and then extended again in 2010 with the support of 85 current House Democrats, 40 current Senate Democrats, and President Obama. The reason we acted then to extend those policies, and the reason we should extend these rates again now, is simple. It's about jobs. Just like 2 years ago, the economy remains weak, with the unemployment rate now at or above 8% for 41 consecutive months. And as the President said, you don't raise taxes in a recession, and that's a quote. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates that these tax increases, when paired with the rest of the policies that constitute the fiscal cliff we face at the end of this year, could cost America between 2 and 3 million jobs. And if we only extend some of the current tax rates, as our Democrat colleagues have suggested, we could lose about 710,000 jobs, according to the study by Ernst & Young. Mr. Chairman, middle-class families cannot afford any more job losses. That's not just my perspective. It's a perspective of small business owners like Kim Beck of the Automatic Feed Company in Napoleon, Ohio. In recent testimony before the House Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Beck spoke about the impact of raising taxes on job creators, saying, and this is a quote, "Tax increases simply leave less for investment in jobs. The last thing Congress should do right now is raise taxes on small manufacturers, just as we are rebounding after a devastating recession, especially to finance more government spending." President Obama and some in Congress proposed to do exactly that by calling for the expiration of the Bush tax cuts on incomes over $250,000 a year. The federal government must recognize that a tax increase on those who report income in the top brackets is a direct tax increase on manufacturers like me, end quote. As we work to stop the tax hike, we must also consider what else can be done to strengthen the economy. That's why, in addition to preventing job-killing tax hikes, Republicans support adopting a fast-track process to enact comprehensive tax reform next year. So the pathway to job creation through a simpler, fairer tax code act, H.R. 6169, which the chairman is very familiar with, includes specific timelines for the House and the Senate to act on comprehensive tax reform. This forces Congress to do what individuals and families, as well as employers of all sizes, have asked: firmly commit to comprehensive tax reform that provides the certainty that taxpayers need to make a plan and that job creators need to make investment and hiring decisions. Independent economists have predicted that when coupled with spending restraint, the common sense tax reform policies reflected in this approach and included in the last two House-passed budgets will lead to the creation of 1 million jobs in the first year alone. Mr. Chairman, this week boils down to two different visions for our country and one choice facing Congress. Do we want to raise taxes and destroy over 710,000 U.S. jobs, or do we want to make the tax code simpler and fairer and create over 1 million jobs for American workers? I thank the chairman for the opportunity to discuss this legislation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Chairman Kemp. We appreciate it. Mr. Levin has discussed his request for us to make a substitute in order, and as I've just said, I'm hoping very much that this committee will do that. As I said, it'll be the first time since 1999 that waivers have been provided. It's a long period of time, but we have that request, and I hope very much that we will be able to ensure that the proposal that you look forward to bringing to us will be made in order. So if you have any further...
Well, thank you very much. And I trust all of you will proceed along that line. So let me
Depends
just...
on how compelling your arguments are right now.
We'll find out.
Well, you've already committed yourselves.
Well, no, I've committed myself, but, I'm just one member of this committee, I have no idea what the committee might do itself as, we work through this process.
Well, I'll make it very short. I'll go on to another point, but I wonder if anybody has any question about making in order our substitute.
There you go.
And I'll go on. Thank you.
Oh, now you're going to go on.
Yes.
Okay, well, I thought you're going to buy it back then? I mean, you're from the Detroit, you know. I mean, I've always heard the line about don't buy it back, you know, after you've already sold it to them.
Things are selling well in Detroit.
Okay.
So let me just add, there's considerable uncertainty in our economy. I think the agreement today, between the leadership in terms of the continuing resolution and essentially extending the appropriations until the end of March is a step in the right direction in terms of reducing uncertainty. Another way to do that is to pass my substitute. Everybody agrees that we should continue the middle class tax cuts. I think there's very broad agreement. There's disagreement beyond that. We should take the areas of agreement and act this week. Every taxpayer would receive a tax cut if we extend the middle income tax cuts, including those above $250,000. In fact, they would receive a larger continued tax cut than those who earn under $250,000. The question is whether the middle class tax cut is going to be held hostage to the proposal that Mr. Camp has presented, our chairman, which would result in a tax cut for people earning over $1 million of $160,000. That's basically the issue. And so I urge very much that there be an end of the uncertainty as to middle class tax cuts this week before we go home. I could add other comments. I very much disagree with this wild claim about 700,000 jobs or whatever it is. I also want to mention that the two bills combined that Mr. Camp has testified, our chairman, essentially would add a tax cut to millionaires of over $330,000, not $160,000, but $330,000, and would increase taxes on millions of American families because of the content of the second bill, because three provisions would either be eliminated in terms of the upgrade in recent years or eliminated altogether. So we'll have a full debate on that, I hope, and an important step towards doing that is to allow the substitute that I have introduced with the leadership and others to come to the floor.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you both here, and again, I think there's a very clear and apparent decision that we as members will make. We want to have a free-flowing debate on the floor, and we want to have the disparate alternatives put forward, and that's exactly what I hope very much that we'll do. So I have no questions for you other than to congratulate you on the positions and the arguments you've made, Mr. Sessions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Welcome to both of you to the Rules Committee for this important opportunity for both sides to have a chance to tout their ideas. Mr. Kemp, I know that there might be some question, at least in the minds of the ranking member, about an issue that he just spoke of with the 700,000 jobs. I believe that he's in reference to what might be called an Ernst & Young long-run macroeconomic impact of increasing tax rates on high-income taxpayers in 2013, which is essentially the Democratic bill that's out of the Senate and combined with what the Democrats in the House want to do. And there is a conclusion that is drawn literally on the first page. Have you had a chance to see that, sir?
Yes.
It says, among other things, that this will harm the economy. Can you provide me your ideas about what you think, up to and including using this report and any other data which you may have?
We've actually had a lot of hearings on this in the committee as well, And the reason is that pass-through entities, which most of business is organized in that form now in America, they're not C corporations, they're pass-through entities. They file as individuals. So while you can say these are people that are rich because they have incomes as a couple of over $250,000, they're not all getting a salary. It's a business in many cases. And we know that more than half of business income will be impacted at that level. So that's why there will be a hit on the economy. And that's why Ernst & Young concluded that they expect that it'll be that many jobs. And I've cited, obviously, a small business manufacturer who testified to that in front of the committee. And, there's a lot of about millionaires and billionaires. And I would just, ask all my colleagues to think about how much is fair. The top 5% are already paying over 50% of all federal income taxes. Should they pay 75%? And how much should the government take? I think when is enough, and what will Washington do with the money? Does anyone really think that Democrats seriously plan to pay down the debt with it, or will that money be wasted on more government spending? I think we all know what will happen. And the truth of the bottom line is the tax increases will destroy about 700,000 American jobs. But what we want to do with this bill is extend current law and not give a tax cut to anybody, as my friend from Michigan said, to those at the top rates. We're not cutting anybody's taxes. We're extending current law for 1 year to get to the pro-growth tax reform that we know this country needs, so we can begin to build an economic recovery and get people back to work. 41 months of 8% unemployment is too high. We know that tax reform done the right way can do that. This then lets the committees of jurisdiction, the Senate will have their bill, the House will have their bill, the committees will work on fashioning legislation that we will then bring to the floor in a series of deadlines next year. So this is a 1 year to give certainty. I know there's I know many of us have all been visited by employers that wonder what's going to happen. And this will provide now, before we get into October, certainty as to the plan that we have, that we actually have a plan to address the difficult economic problems facing our country. Look, I want America to be the #1 economy in the world again. I want this to be the economy that's leading the world. And one way we can do that is through pro-growth tax reform.
Could I comment briefly?
I would ask the gentleman to make any comment that he chooses. Yes, sir.
Let me just mention a couple facts. 97% of small business have income under $250,000. 97%. And that is one of the flaws in this argument about the necessity of extending the high income tax cut in terms of jobs. The Ernst & Young study is otherwise flawed. It doesn't assume that any of the money that would be received by not extending the high income tax cut would be used for deficit reduction. There's a $41 billion difference between the two bills in terms of the deficit increase. That's the difference between extending the high income tax cut and doing that for middle income families. And I want to mention one other fact. In 2011, 93% of the income growth in this country went to the top 1%. So in terms of economic growth as well as equity, but economic growth, in terms of certainty, and I want to emphasize this, there's so much talk about certainty. Why live here without extending the middle income tax cuts? Why live here? There's talk about tax reform. Most of the tax reform proposals are only generalities, including in the bill that has been introduced here. And essentially doing what is suggested there, having a reduction to two tax brackets, 25 and 10, as I said, would mean for upper income families, millionaires, an additional $330,000 in a tax cut. The middle income families of this country want us to do better.
Mr. Levin, I'll answer that question since you asked the question. That is, we know that since President Obama has taken office, that the income from Americans has fallen $2,400 a family.
How much did it fall under his predecessor?
Well, you know what? I will tell you that he had 60 straight months of economic growth. But what I would say to you is that we were asked to believe in this model. It sounds like you're trying to say that we should do this just to do it without the job benefit. And that's where Republicans and Democrats do differ, because we're after job growth and more revenue for the government. Mr. Kemp, I note that following the enactment of tax relief in 2003, that the amount of revenue collected by the American government went up by over $700 billion over 5 years, and the deficit went down. Is that because what Republicans did was a pro-jobs growth package, and is that what you're trying to do here?
Well, if the economy does better, and more people are working, more people pay taxes, and revenue to the government goes up. And that's the kind of pro-growth model we're looking at, not just trying to see how much the government can take from one group of Americans as opposed to another. So what we'd like to do is extend current law, which there's been consensus on for the last 10 years, for over a decade, for 1 year, so that we can move to a code that is less complicated. There have been 5,000 changes to the tax code in the last 10 years. It's very complicated. Even small, families and small business owners hire preparers and spend countless hours and dollars complying with the current system. And there's this sense that this system isn't fair, that if you have a really sharp accountant, your effective tax rate is going to be much less than somebody who doesn't really have access to that sort of information. So we need to have a more transparent code. We need to have a less complicated tax code. There are many items that have worked their way in with very good rationale, but we've got too much of that. And now we need to go back. It's been 26 years since we've had a hard look at this. I think the American people want us to do our work. There are many people in the Congress that want to work on this issue and believe that this is the direction that we can go in order to get the country moving again. It's been far too long. The recession is still lingering. And yes, there are pockets of growth out there and some manufacturers, but it's really a question of whether it will be sustained. And we're also looking at really strong headwinds with what's coming from Europe. I just saw a company in my district that announced less than projected earnings, and they cited the difficulties in Europe because so many of our companies are doing business around the world. So we're going to have strong headwinds there. But we need to really get this country back in a leadership position on this kind of policy, and this process will allow us to do that.
Seems like that the thing that you're talking about is the momentum and these other things that you're talking about are jobs.
Absolutely.
Job creation, job benefit, and the opportunity for people to have jobs. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that I include in the record
Without
this
objection, the Ernst
Ernst & Young
study
report.
will appear in the record.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Ms.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, gentlemen, and Mr. Camp. Let me echo what the chairman
Oh,
said.
thank you.
that, you're a brother to all of us, and we care about it very deeply.
Thank
But I'm going to argue with you just a little
Okay.
bit now afterwards. The idea that, the Democrats would not try to do anything about the deficit, I think we all recall pretty clearly that it was Vice President Cheney under George W. Bush's presidency who announced to the world that deficits didn't matter. I would doubt any Democrat that I've ever heard of would have ever even said such a thing, and indeed, under them, deficits didn't matter. What we're trying to do is to help clean that up, and we really have to do that. But I think my biggest problem with the Bush tax cuts is that they don't work. A decade ago, when that was all passed, we promised that all these jobs were going to be created and everything was going to be rosy. We just come from an administration with Clinton who had created 23 million jobs and had cut the deficit to almost nothing. It was really quite remarkable. Actually, we cut the deficit and we're starting on the debt. Where are those jobs that were supposed to be created under the Bush tax cuts? We're in worse shape than we've been since the Great Depression. So frankly, as far as I'm concerned, it simply didn't work. I want so much. I hope that everybody does really agree that we need to put Mr. Levin's amendment in order because I'd really like to see what people are feeling about it. I'm not getting any great outcry at home, even from millionaires. Save me. Save me. You know, they are, the corporations, let me see if I got some statistics here for a minute. This has always bugged me about corporations not paying their fair share. I think, here we are. There were 1,500 Americans who earned more than $1 million and paid absolutely nothing federal income tax. And, you know, I want to close those loopholes, too, about offshore, hiding money away to save taxes. I think that's the most un-American thing I know of. But 30 profitable Fortune 500 companies paid no taxes, not a dime, between 2008 and 2010. I think it's time they contributed. In fact, what really summed it up, the Bush tax cuts created no jobs, but it's certainly created for us a serious revenue shortage in this country, and I want them to pay their share. I don't have any questions of either of you, but I'd like to put the statement of the administration policy in, ask unanimous consent, and say, and just comment on one paragraph here, maybe two. The President is strongly in favor of both individual and business tax reform. Repeatedly called for bipartisan individual reform that would lower tax rates, cut inefficient and unfair tax rates, cut the deficit. See, Democrats care about that a lot. Increase job creation, growth in the United States, and make the tax code more fair. Those are really the Democrat principles that we talked about in here last week. They believe that what this would do to the average American family would be pretty devastating. It would be an increase for most of them, while their rich buddies don't get any. I agree with you. I want this economy to be the best it ever was. But even in our heyday, when we were the best, we were the best manufacturer, we did everything in the world, we never did destroy the middle class. And that's happening now under these tax cuts and this tax business. And I more than anything in the world, I want us to be fair again and give everybody an opportunity to rise, which this does not do. But we are going to put more and more people in such precarious positions that we wonder if they're going to be able to survive it. The administration says if they were presented with this bill, his senior advisors would recommend that he veto it. Thank you very much.
Ms. Fox.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have been listening very closely to our two presenters here tonight, and I wanted to ask Mr. Camp if he might expound a little bit on some comments he's made, and then I take a slightly different tack. You quoted the President as saying 2 years ago, you don't raise taxes in an economy. Do you have any insights at all as to why, with the economy in worse shape than it was 2 years ago, why in the world the President would want to increase taxes now, and how in the world could that possibly help the economy now if it wouldn't help the economy 2 years ago?
Well, the last three deficits have been unprecedented. The debt as a percentage of our economy is now more than all of our economy. And it has been a problem, but it has become a much worse problem. And then with the difficult economic problems in Europe as well, I think that this is a search for more revenue. Now, the problem is we really need to get the economy moving again and really gain the trust of the American people back. And for middle-class Americans, they need a job. The reason the middle class has taken such a difficult hit is that's where the much of the job loss has been. And while the published rate is around 8% nationally, we all know the effective rate is much higher because there are so many people who have left the workforce. We're going to get another jobs report on Friday. We've seen successive quarters downgraded in terms of the amount of economic growth that we've seen. If we can get to a pro-growth tax policy in a revenue-neutral way so that we can really get the kind of job creation that we have estimated, 1 million jobs in the first year versus 700,000 if we take the approach that if we take the approach the Democrats are suggesting, and if we can get people back to work, we will begin, that is one thing we can do to begin to solve our fiscal problems.
Could I answer?
Would you-
Could I comment?
Excuse me, Mr. Levin, if I could follow up with Mr. Camp a little bit. If you would, I don't know how many people are observing this, but I suspect most Americans have not had a course in economics. Most Americans don't understand a lot of basic economics, although they do understand they're hurting right now and they're frustrated. They want their government to do something.
Right.
Hardworking Americans have played by the rules and all they want is a job. Say again what you said a minute ago, because I think it's worth repeating, what our deficit and debt are compared to our GDP. I just think, and particularly if you want to refer to what's happening in Europe, I mean, again, what I know about this, I read in the material that we're given, but I know we're not in very good shape, just like Europe is not in good shape. So if you'd repeat those things and say a little more.
And part of, as you say, in economics is it's not only where you are, but the trajectory. Where are you going to be? And with successive deficits of over $1 trillion 3 years in a row, and the debt dramatically increasing to, whose number, 15 or 16 trillion, it is now more than all of our economy. And when you look at the nations that are in trouble, and of course we had this in Simpson-Bowles, this testimony, and experts came before the committee and said, when your debt gets to that level, you're taking about 1 percentage point off your country's economic growth. And that in America is about 1 million jobs. So part of getting our economy moving again is not only to create the jobs that would come from tax reform, but also from lessening the amount of debt in relationship to our economy.
And, excuse me again, Mr. Levin, when people ask me or say to me, they say all the time, you Republicans are one-note people. You just don't want to raise taxes. That's what we hear from Republicans. Why don't you come up with something new? People say that to me in a critical way. We haven't had any new ideas. But one of my responses to them is, we know that the proposal to raise taxes on only the wealthiest people in this country won't stop there. And it doesn't answer the problem. Would you say something a little bit about, again, the trajectory that we are facing right now in terms of where we're going? It's my understanding, and again, I'm not as facile with the numbers as you are, not being on your committee, but it's my understanding that even if we did what the President's asking us to do and what our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are asking us to do, that this only reduces the deficit by about 10 to 12% over the next 10 years. And it's only 2% of the new spending, or the spending that the President wants. And that he wants to add, if I understand it right, $10 trillion to the national debt. Now, again, I know people watching this or listening to this, we don't want to throw out so many numbers that people can't follow it. But I think it's important that we explain to the American people that raising taxes is not the answer to our situation. That cutting spending at the federal government level, or at least that's what I've always understood. Would you explain it in layman's terms?
Well, the impact on the deficit is not as significant as one might think. But the potential injury to job creation is at least 700,000 jobs. And if we don't stop the tax hike, it could be 2 to 3 million. So we really do need to address this. And I also think it's just so critical to see the countries in Europe. We know the preview of this movie. They've let their debt become out of control with relationship to their economy. We have done the same thing, and the Simpson-Bowles Commission had findings in this regard, and even quantified that it is about 1% off the gross domestic product, which is how much your economy is growing. And we've seen anemic growth in the United States, and if we could add 1% to that growth, that would be jobs. But also, we would see 1 million jobs created with pro-growth tax reform. And this is something that's been in our budget for 2 years. We've had more than 20 hearings in the Ways and Means Committee on various aspects of tax reform. The groundwork is there. Many corporations and businesses have come in and said they are willing to give up certain tax preferences like R&D and other things in order to get the lower rate. So the lower rate doesn't come with no changes. The lower rates come with an ability, and of course exactly what those are going to be up for the Congress to determine. And this will ultimately, if we are successful in getting the one-year extension and moving into a debate about tax reform, this is something that there'll be a Senate and a House bill, and we will need to move forward in a bipartisan way in order to accomplish this.
Thank you very much, Mr. Camp. Mr. Levin, I'd like to ask you one question, and I know you want to say something else, but I would appreciate if first, before you say anything else, you answer my question. Could you tell me where historically we have evidence that raising taxes helps the economy grow? Do you have any evidence of that in the history of this country where raising taxes helps the economy grow?
The answer is I voted for a bill when President Clinton was president that raised taxes and the economy grew. It grew. So you don't have to go back very many decades. Secondly,
How long did it take for that to happen, and what was happening with spending at that time?
look, what the president proposed and I voted for was a balanced package of tax cuts and cuts in programs. Both. And that's the basic issue before this country and the United States of America. And that is, do you want more revenues, as was true in the Clinton bill, and cutting spending, or do you simply want to say more revenues? And the position of the Republican Party, kind of stuck in cement on this, is no more revenues.
Excuse me just a moment. Mr. Camp, if I just understood you, that is not the position of the Republican
That
Party.
is not our position.
Okay, but
There will be more revenue from pro-growth tax reform.
there will be revenue from
but not more taxes. You're going to claim that growth creates revenues, and that was the mythology of the Bush years. And by the way, it is not correct to say that the economy is worse today than it was 2 years ago, if I might say so. That's not correct. You said that. The economy isn't worse. The unemployment rate has gone down, not as much as it should. In the last 3 years, several million jobs have been created. The first month of the Obama presidency, succeeding the Bush administration, we lost 700,000 jobs in 1 month.
Mr. Levin, who was in charge of the Congress at that time? Who was in charge of the Congress? At that time, who was in charge of the Congress?
That first month,
Yes, sir.
we were
We were,
first
meaning we,
Democrats.
Democrats.
That was the first month after years of the Bush administration. It is also not correct to simply throw out Europe. The genius of this administration was it did not follow the policies of Europe, and that was austerity without growth. It combined austerity and growth, and therefore we're in better shape than Europe. Not as good, but better shape. And let me say one last thing. There's a difference of $50 billion between the Republican bill extending all the tax cuts and this substitute. $50 billion in 1 year. And I find it ironical that any Republican would minimize that differential of $50 billion in 1 year. I think that, look, we could go on, and I welcome this opportunity. I just want to reiterate, when you asked me about evidence of raising taxes, yes, I voted for a bill that did. And there's no evidence whatsoever that extending the high-income tax cuts will promote growth.
Mr. Camp, I think you wanted to respond to
Well,
that.
I just think it's important to say that we don't want to leave less for investment. And raising taxes leaves less for investment and the job creation and growth that follows that. So to say that the only way we can get revenue is in a zero-sum game to make sure that the federal government takes more from the American people, I think is a wrong approach. And there's been a lot of work done on moving to a system that will create more than 1 million jobs in the first year alone, rather than costing us 700,000 jobs by raising taxes. That's the choice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to, I don't have any questions. I see our distinguished minority leader, Minority Whip here. So I'm going to forego my question. I just want to say one thing in response to the gentlelady from North Carolina. She talked about most Americans haven't taken a course in economics, as if most Americans don't understand the economy. The reality is, I think most Americans get it, and I think they think this Congress is out of touch. I think most Americans believe you don't have to agree on everything to agree on something, and we all seem to agree that we should extend the tax cuts for people earning $250,000 or less, whether you're Donald Trump or whether you're just earning, no matter what you're earning. We agree on that. I think the American people are watching this, scratching their heads, say, well, why can't you enact that? Why can't you just do that, get that done right now, provide certainty there, and then, let's fight it out on the other stuff. But the other thing most Americans, I think, agree on is fairness. And they understand that we're in a difficult economy. What they don't understand is why people in the middle and people struggling to get in the middle are being asked to sacrifice, and people who are well off, and in some cases extremely well off, are being told, you do nothing. We ask you nothing. And I think that's where people, I don't care whether you're a Democrat or Republican or Independent, that's where people are watching this and saying, this just doesn't seem right. If we all have to sacrifice, then we all have to sacrifice. The Donald Trumps of the world shouldn't be exempt. Let's close with this. I also sit on the Agriculture Committee. I sat there last week, a couple weeks ago, when they cut $16.5 billion out of food and nutrition programs. And we were told, boy, we have a terrible deficit. We've got to make these tough choices. These are difficult times. Where's the courage? Well, it doesn't take a lot of courage to tell a millionaire or billionaire who gives lots of money to political campaigns, who pay tens of thousands of dollars to go to country club fundraisers, to spend millions on super PACs in campaigns, to say, you know what, we're going to ask you to do nothing. So I'll just say, and again, I think what people are looking for is fairness here. I think the Democratic alternative represents some fairness. I think it also represents, we agree on this. And, on the other stuff, we can have it out at a later time.
Could I just say, I just want to comment, would that be, well, what you're talking about is raising a rate at a certain level. And what we're talking about is comprehensive reform of our entire code. And I think you're talking at a rate of $250,000, but millionaires would not impact the deficit.
Listen, I would like a comprehensive reform of our tax
Yeah.
system. That's not what you're
What
you're doing is...
Yes, I am. No, what I'm saying is...
And it's extending of the Bush tax cuts.
For 1 year.
Right, for 1 year, it's not comprehensive
And at a
reform.
companion bill...
Right.
With not only our principles for where we'd go, but also a companion bill that would have
Next year,
expedited...
with this deficit, you are extending tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires.
It's both.
Yeah, and I'll be honest with you, with all due respect, I've tried in this committee, maybe 16, my colleagues will agree with me, 16, maybe 20 times to try to go after, oil subsidies and other special interest tax breaks. Can't even get it made in order.
We want to go after, we want to look at all of
You've
that.
been in charge for a while now. You haven't done it, so I don't have a lot of confidence in that. What we're doing right now is you're asking for a 1-year extension of the Bush tax cuts. I think most Americans think that that's not fair.
Will the gentleman yield?
I'm happy to yield.
I thank my friend for yielding. And let me just remind him that just last week, this committee reported out the bill that I introduced that actually will ensure that we take action on the issue of tax reform. I praised President Obama, if you'll recall last week, for his call to reduce the top corporate rate, recognizing that that is very important in our quest to try and grow the economy. I believe that in this process, we want to close loopholes. We want to do many of the things that my friend has said, and it's very important for us. It's very important for us to do this in the context of overall tax reform. As that process goes forward, as we move to April 30th of next year, what we plan to do is we plan to not, as President Obama said, do what would in fact hurt us, and that is increase taxes as we're dealing with the slow economy. I thank my friend for yielding.
And so you have a bill that basically does not extend the child tax credit, does not extend the opportunity tax credit, but protects tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires. We have a different philosophy.
No, that's-
that is priorities.
That's
But
not
I
correct.
will withhold my question.
Well, we do extend those. You want them extended at the stimulus plus up level. We don't do,
So we will
do it at the same dollar
We'll
amount.
punish people,
We
basically.
actually, both bills are at the same dollar amount, but what you do is you enhance refundability of that. We go back to the pre-stimulus law on that.
Mr. Governor, I just want to correct the record. In the two cases, it's related to the improvement, which is important. Don't minimize it. In terms of the education opportunity tax, it eliminates it. Eliminates it for 10, 11, 9 families. The bill that the Republicans have presented would affect about 25 million families. Two of the provisions relate to improvements that we made, and the third relates to the education opportunity tax. And why in the world, when we're talking about the need to improve education, would you eliminate the $2,500 grant that affects 10 million, 11 million families? You're absolutely right. And in terms of comprehensive tax reform, it's one thing to talk about it. The real impact of what the Republicans are proposing is to cut rates down to 2, 25 and 10, as I said. There'd be a $330,000 tax break for people with income over $1 million. And what else does it do? It has general principles. There's nothing comprehensive about it. What they're doing is saying we'll do next year. We'll see who's in control. We'll have tax reform either way. Right now, this committee, this Congress has a chance to pass something we all agree to, middle-income tax cuts.
Let me just say that, for one point, that these expanded refundable credits that my friends on the other side call tax cuts, the Nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation says these are spending. These aren't tax cuts. When you enhance the refundability of something. So we really need to follow the characterization of the Joint Committee on Taxation on this. But
Their tax
they
reductions
wanna-
will take them away.
look, I think a one-off on rates is not going to move the economy and the country forward. We need to look at our tax code in a comprehensive way, not just on the individual side, but look at the highest corporate rate in the world. We need to look at the fact that we're still a worldwide system of taxation. There's a bill out there. The president has a framework on corporate tax policy that's very similar to the direction that the draft bill I've introduced goes. So there's more than just the rate here, and the rate isn't going to be enough to impact the impact that we need to see after 41 months of unemployment at 8%. We need to do more than just simply do a one-off simplistic bumper sticker rate. I mean, that's just not enough. Americans want more.
It's not simplistic. We're talking about a middle-income tax cut.
I yield back my time.
Yeah, allow me to try and not take too much time here. I maybe just have a technical question, a broader question, and maybe a statement. And I'll once again try and be extremely brief with you without putting too many cliches in the middle of that. The first one, Mr. Levin, I believe you said that 97% of all small businesses make more than $250,000. I just wanted less than $250,000. I just wanted to know where the source of that information was. The IRS in my district had The IRS in my district
Joint
had a
Tax Committee.
tax committee.
Joint Tax, the nonpartisan Joint Tax Committee.
Is that divided by district by any chance, simply because the IRS in my district had a remarkably different version of small taxpayers in my particular area, and almost a mere opposite?
I'm not sure, I doubt it can be done by district. And let me just say something.
All right, that's all I want. I didn't.
Okay.
Don't need
We're going to hear.
I just wanted to know from whence that came. Second one is perhaps more to Mr. Camp. I realize you made one statement in there about this not being a zero-sum game, which I think to me is somewhat significant. I've said this before, and I'm not really trying to whine, although I am. I'm an old school teacher, which makes me one of the least wealthy people around here. In fact, at one time, one of the papers ranked us all, and I think I was somewhere about 430 out of the 441 of us. So whoever happened to be those actually below me, I have a great deal of empathy for them. And I know, even though I've heard on the internet that after serving here 1 year, I get my entire salary for life, and I will never be in Social Security, and I will have health care all the rest of my life, which we might as well do, since everyone thinks we do that, and get it over with. I realize that's not true. Well, we'd be voted out of. I'd be voted out of office, but I'd have my money. Who cares? So,
I think the chairman and I should leave, and you should discuss that idea.
The concept, though, is, let me make the assumption that I'm assuming you guys are not the ones below me, whoever that happens to be, and you're over there above the 250 grand level, as some people are. The one thing I'm having a hard time getting my hands across in this zero-sum game is, if I'm taxing you at a higher level, how does that actually help me monetarily? I don't get the money coming from you. It will go over to fund a government entity that was going to expend something somewhere else. It's the one thing that becomes unique here, that if you give more, it does not necessarily mean that I get more. Right. And I find that to be a unique concept that we keep playing around with and get caught up in what is fair and what is not fair, and I have a difficult time with it. And now, since I'd spent more than I was going to, let me just say my one problem I have with both bills, including yours, my problem with yours. As long as the death tax exists at all, it is wrong. That is still the worst, most abominable, unfair tax ever invented by mankind, and I will not be satisfied until that is eliminated totally. And until there is such a bill that does that, we have yet to finish our work here. And with that, I'll yield back.
Mr. Hastings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I too will forego a substantial number of questions that I have, primary among them being why the chair of the Joint Committee on Taxation would have sole power to determine the introduction of the expedited provisions. I don't understand that, and I gather that it's a political calculus that is being employed, and that's the prerogative of the majority, with whom I disagree. After 20 years, sure.
I would just say both Mr. Camp and Mr. Levin have referred to this as the nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation. I thank my friend for yielding.
Yeah, well, the provision that I was speaking about allows the certification to be at the discretion of the Joint Tax Committee chairman alone. And that would allow, among other things, an opportunity to add other measures that are unrelated, such as health care repeal and a variety of other things. But I don't want to go down that road. I want to simply say that if kicking the can down the road was a parliamentary Olympic event, then the American Congress, with its systemic cowardice, as I see it, would win gold, silver, and bronze, and tin. I just don't understand why we continue to not face up to the harsh realities that we are all confronted, Democrat and Republic, liberal and conservative, with in this country. And I don't think this gets us there by extending something a year, particularly for 25 million Americans that are working families that I don't see how this is going to help them at all, and I, for the life of me, do not understand why we can't pass the middle-class tax cuts that would allow for certainty for at least 98% of Americans. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Well, I just wanted to
Yes,
comment on the
of
one
course,
point.
yeah.
In the model, this is actually Mr. Dreyer's bill, but the model for that was the Budget Committee. And so we looked to other House procedures and congressional procedures, and every day it is in the sole authority of the Budget Chairman to determine budget points of order. And it would be done in the same way this, however, relying on the advice of the professional Budget Committee staff, the Budget Chairman makes that, just as the Ways and Means Committee would be relying on the nonpartisan recommendation of the Joint Committee on Taxation as to what would be in order and would not be in order. So this is a process.
You do understand my concern that I expressed.
And I've heard others raise it, but I don't know that everyone's heard why it was done that way. It's
All
to
right.
follow what is already a procedure of the House with regard to budget points of order. And again, the professional nonpartisan staff of the Joint Committee on Taxation would make that recommendation, and the chairman would simply be implementing that.
Well, let me just add, if I might, I think it grants a power, we're talking about the second bill, that would be way beyond technical.
Well, I won't.
Well, the Supreme Court's already done that, so we have all the power we want in the Ways and Means Committee.
I won't belabor the point, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to associate myself with Mr. Hastings' comments. I'm disappointed by a one-year extension, too. I guess I'm more disappointed in Republicans than in the 6 years we controlled all three branches of government. We weren't serious about fundamental tax reform. That tax commission report of the president's wasted a year of all of our lives and sat on a desk never to be seen again. I'm equally disappointed, though, Mr. Levin, that in the 2 years that Democrats controlled all the legislative branch and the executive branch, tax reform movement was just as anemic. And the truth is, Chairman Camp, there has been more movement in the direction of fundamental tax reform in the 18 months you've been chairman than I've seen in 2 decades of watching the process around here. And I applaud you for that. I agree with Mr. Levin. I'm not as much of a fan of the principles that you laid out as I am the principles that I have laid out. But the principles that you have laid out are open enough that Mr. Levin can have his say, and those of us who support the fair tax can have our say, and to be serious enough about it, to put it on an expedited process, just say, let's stop talking about it and let's get it done. Let's get the loopholes out that Mr. McGovern is discussing, and on and on. And that's what I'd like to ask you, Mr. Levin. Who do you believe benefits the most from all the loopholes and the carve-outs and the exceptions in the code? Is it the middle-class taxpayers that you're here today to help, or is it a different class of folks?
Let me just mention, sometimes the word loophole is misapplied. Essentially, you talked about the principles. To get down to have two brackets, 25 and 10, it would reduce the revenues dramatically. And in order to achieve that, you would have to diminish and probably eliminate.
Let me make sure that I understand what you're saying, because as I understand the principles that Chairman Camp has laid out, the only proposals that he's entertaining are proposals that bring in between 18 and 19% of GDP. Today, we're bringing in nowhere close to 18 or 19% of GDP, but you tell me this reform is going to lower revenue instead of increase revenue. What am I misunderstanding?
No, those two brackets would reduce revenues, and in order to make up the revenues, you would have to eliminate or come close to it the mortgage interest deduction, the charitable contribution, the health exclusion, the education provisions, state and local taxes.
Can I ask who benefits most from the state and local tax?
The answer is,
most from
we have charts.
Who benefits most from the health deduction?
The answer, I'd like to send you the charts from joint tax, and I would appreciate you looking them over. The mortgage interest deduction is more than anything else a middle-class policy. a middle-class policy. The same is true of the health exclusion, very much so, overwhelmingly middle income. The same is true of the education, health, education, and the mortgage interest deduction help to make the middle class of this country. And to simply say 2 tax brackets without explaining how you would get there and the impact, I don't call that comprehensive tax reform. There are loopholes that we need to address, and I could give you some.
I think of comprehensive as being a large term, an encompassing term. It sounds like from what you're saying that in order to get to the rates that Chairman Camp has laid out, we're going to have to deal with almost every provision in the tax code, that all of those loopholes are going to have to go, that all of the exceptions and exemptions are going to have to go. And I would take you not even from the personal side, but what about the corporate side? That's an even larger challenge to get down to a 25.
No, and the Joint Tax Committee said that if you eliminate all of the provisions that stimulate manufacturing in this country, you would not get down to 25%. So my criticism is simply saying there's a figure without saying how you would get there is not an effective way to approach tax reform, which we need. And I appreciate your asking that.
I do want to make a comment about this Joint Committee on Taxation study. It was an incomplete analysis, and there are at least 90 tax preferences they did not include in this, and they cited it as being a very preliminary study. So, they haven't done a complete review on that. And the reality is that if we can get comprehensive tax reform that creates jobs, we don't have to eliminate every tax preference. But that's what the committee process will be about, both in the House and the Senate. And as you point out, the principles we adopt say that revenue will have to be scored at coming in between 18 and 19%.
Excuse me. You mentioned all the hearings the Ways and Means Committee has had, Mr. Chairman. I represent the fair tax folks, big believer. When the President's Tax Commission took a look at that, it said no fundamental reform proposal did more to lift up the lowest on the income spectrum than did the fair tax. But you held the first hearing on the fair tax in 12 years. And I don't think extending things 1 year at the time is the way to get things done, but neither is ignoring things altogether. And the kind of work and the kind of effort you put into it, it means a lot. It means a lot to me. Mr. Levin, you took issue with the Ernst & Young study that said 700,000 jobs would be lost if we implemented your proposal. I think you had issues with the methodology as well as their conclusions. If it's not 700,000, is it closer to 600,000 jobs that would be killed by your proposal? What's the right number? Is it 500,000 jobs that are going to be lost
by the Republican proposal to continue the high income tax cut? I think the answer is I don't think there's evidence that continuing it will lead to economic growth. Indeed, we had years and years of taxation with that provision, and there is no evidence that it worked. Indeed, it led to immense deficits. The Bush tax cuts were not the only source of the deficits in this country, but they were a significant source of deficits. And there's a $50 billion difference between the two bills in terms of the increase in deficit. That's a lot of money in 1 year. It's $49 billion.
I'm trying to figure out what that $50 billion is worth. Again, I accept your premise that the study may not be entirely accurate, but if it's not 700,000, what is it? I mean, is killing 500,000 jobs worth this? Because the chairman's not talking about doing this in perpetuity. He's asking for 1 year so that we can get serious about something that you and I both agree this Congress has not been serious about since 1986. And in the meantime, again, I don't know if it's 700,000 jobs we're going to eliminate. I don't know if it's 600,000 jobs we're going to eliminate.
I'm not sure there's evidence.
It might only be 500,000 jobs.
It may be zero, too. It may be zero. Look, there's agreement on extending the
gentlemen say that sincerely. I mean, Ernst & Young got it so wrong.
I think their methodology
of everything.
Their methodology is flawed, and they assume that none of the differential of $49 billion would be used for deficit reduction. It's a very, very flawed study, and I think there is strong evidence that extending the Bush tax cuts for high-income families will not promote economic growth. We had before the Ways and Means Committee proposals like accelerated depreciation, which Republicans and Democrats have supported, which clearly would promote economic growth. And yet it doesn't come out of committee and we don't vote on it. Why don't this week we vote on extending accelerated depreciation at 100%? Why do we do that? Why don't we extend the middle income tax cuts and do that and have the argument about the high income tax cuts later? And the answer is that the Republican Party is essentially stuck in cement on extending the high income tax cuts. That's what Grover Norquist says, don't do it. And we can't get enough flexibility on your side to sit down and do the middle income tax cuts and argue about high income afterwards.
I would say to the gentleman that I fear that's not why we can't get those things done. I fear it's partisanly charged statements like that one, which is why we can't get things done. I don't know if the gentleman is aware. I'm not a signatory of a Grover Norquist pledge, though I appreciate the work that he's trying to do. But there's not one member of the Republican conference, not one, that doesn't believe in higher revenues for the United States of America. And you've said it not once, not twice, but 3 times in the time that I've been here, and I was late to this hearing.
I was talking about higher taxes.
You're talking about higher tax rates, Mr. Levin. I know that you are. But what you're saying is that folks don't believe in higher revenue, and the chairman doesn't only believe in it, he's come out and said if it doesn't happen, he's not going to have his name associated with it. I admire him for that.
As long as there's no tax increase.
Huge tax increase. And I would just close with this, Mr. Chairman. I look back at 1986, and the gentleman may have been here in 1986. I was not. I look at the work that you did, and again, I'm tremendously proud of that. In 1986, the individual income tax revenues to this nation were $348 billion. With the reduction in tax rates that you all came together in a bipartisan way to implement, with the kind of comprehensive tax reform that eliminated loopholes, flattened rates, lowered, broadened bases, 3 years later, 1989, income tax receipts to this nation had gone up by 33%. 33% on the corporate side, with what you did on the corporate side, Mr. Levin, 1986, $63 billion. Just 3 years later, in 1989, they'd gone up 66%. Mr. Levin, you did it once. I think you can do it again. I know the chairman wants to work in that direction. I'll tell you, speaking for the Republican freshman class, we want to work in that direction, too. If we can do what you did in 1986, I'm going to call that a huge success, and I applaud you both for moving in that direction.
And millions of jobs.
Millions of jobs, Mr. Chairman.
And you'll support some increases in taxes.
I looked at what, again, I am committed. My sights may be a little higher than the chairman's, in fairness. He set a low bar at 18% of GDP. I see constant spending at 20% of GDP. We can have that discussion. But 18% of GDP is about 15% better than what we're doing right now. Yeah. And I'll take 15% in the right direction as a good step in the right direction. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I think it's, it's unfortunate that we're having this discussion in this way here today. There is, and Mr. Kemp knows this as well, strong bipartisan support for tax reform. We could be here talking about whether the marginal rate should be 27.5% or 30% or 25%, as this indicates. Instead, this bill fixes it at 35%. We could be talking about corporate tax reform, where there's great interest from both sides of the aisle to help make American companies more competitive and grow jobs here and prevent outsourcing of jobs, and we're not. Now, we're presented with a rather odd H.R. 6169, and I say rather odd because its solutions to this problem are that it identifies your own committee, Mr. Kemp, as an impediment to tax reform, our committee is an impediment to tax reform, and our Cantor is a impediment to tax reform. It essentially says that tax reform, which, by the way, it actually defines, so rather than have a discussion about tax reform, it says, here's what it is, with certain parameters that, as you know, don't have bipartisan support. It says if we can't get it through the Ways and Means Committee, it's discharged. If Rules doesn't take it up, it's discharged. I'll be happy to yield to the chair.
I thank my friend for yielding. And let me just say that on all 3 counts, that's not accurate. The impediment happens to be on the other side of the Capitol. where the threat of filibusters is really the reason that we are pursuing the goal that we have here to ensure that we can actually have action taken. I have a great...
If I can just recall time for a further question in dialogue with the chair, then why does 6169 contain those expedited House procedures, very specifically bypassing this committee?
Procedures so that we can make sure that we work with the Senate to get this done. But the real impediment I don't see as this institution. The impediment happens to be over on the other side of the Capitol, as we all know is often the case. I thank my friend for you.
Well, expedited rules for the Senate are something that I think both sides of this House can generally agree on. What this bill provides, in addition to the expedited rules for the Senate, which would be less problematic, although, again, it predefines what tax reform is, it, again, bypasses this committee, it bypasses your own committee, Chairman Camp, as well as bypassing the majority leader, whereby if the majority leader does not bring up the bill, any member of the House can then do so. So it does continue those House committees. I don't see this as, I see this as an avoidance of the discussion of tax reform, as opposed to a constructive step. So my only question is, why are we not talking about tax reform? Why are we not talking about a marginal rate of somewhere between 25 and 30%, a corporate rate of somewhere around 25%? Why instead are we talking about a deficit-busting tax proposal with a marginal rate of 35% without any corporate tax reform in it to make American companies more competitive?
Well, there's a couple of points. One, this fast-track process has been a discussion between the House and the Senate since 2011, and was really something that was considered also in the supercommittee. But this is not like the supercommittee process. This is one that is it is empowering the committees to do their work. And it is about the principles of tax reform are in this legislation as well, saying that it's going to be revenue neutral and that revenue has to be between 18 and 19% of GDP, which is above the 40-year historical average, and as Mr. Woodall pointed out, certainly higher than what it is now. These processes are mirrored in the House and Senate to get Senate agreement on them. So they're very similar approaches in both bodies. So both sides have been talking about this, and Senator Baucus is quoted as saying, I'm very interested in fast track. So this is something that we've been working with both the House and Senate, trying to fashion a way that we can have the House Act and the Senate Act, and then a conference committee, and then a vote in the House. A regular order. That's what we're trying to find a way to do.
Well, again...
knowing time is short, we want to do it in a year.
Well, and knowing time is short, I would hope that, your committee, I wish that it could take up tax reform in an expeditious manner and find a bipartisan path to a concept that was, as Mr. Woodall mentioned, embodied in 1986, have the important discussions around what the rate should be, make sure that we can have a fair tax code for our country that promotes growth. And I think it's doable, but we're not doing that today, unfortunately. Instead, we're talking about a rate that's higher than any of the rates, even when I look at Democratic proposals for tax reform, some of them might have a 30% rate, and I know yours has a 25% rate. But when anybody talking about tax reform is talking about lower than a 35 or 39.6% rate. So too, on the corporate side, looking at somewhere between a 25 to 28% rate from what I've heard on the revenue neutral basis. So again, I hope that this doesn't serve as an excuse not to pursue that, and I hope that your committee does take this opportunity to do something for our country, which is very important, which is tax reform, and I'll give back to the chair.
Well, Mr. Camp, I appreciate where you are on this issue of tax reform. Being new to this body 2 years now, you look back, you go, why haven't we been able to accomplish this in the past? And we're talking 20 years ago or longer was the last time we were able to even discuss it and move forward. But today we're talking about, we hear extensions of tax cuts or tax increases. I think what you're asking for is a year of no change in regards to the tax policy
that was implemented under the Bush administration, re-implemented under this administration, so we can go to regular order. Am I seeing this
correct.
correctly?
You're correct.
How do you see regular order proceeding over this next, you have until April?
Well, you'd begin, I mean, we've spent the last 2 years laying the groundwork with hearings.
How many hearings have you had, sir?
More than 20.
Okay.
On various aspects, both corporate, individual. We've actually had we've had 2 joint hearings with the Senate, the first hearings on tax policy in 70 years between the 2 bodies. And we have a third planned for the fall on investment taxes, and so we have a third one we hope to complete yet this year. So we're going to continue to work up until the very end. And then the committees would begin to mark up legislation, and you'd have until April to do it.
In regular order?
In regular order, in an open process.
Input from both sides?
Yes, and votes, and amendments, and trying to fashion a bill that we could move forward on. Obviously, we've laid out some principles that, when you look at what, at least on the corporate rate, what the rest of the world is doing, we need to be in step, given as mobile as capital is. And again, we are hamstringing our U.S. companies that do business overseas by double taxation, and so we'd like to address that, also bring dollars back from overseas, and if we can simplify the code and get to 2 simpler rates for individuals and have pass-throughs and corporate entities at the same rate, there isn't a distortion there. So those principles are there to create the kind of economic growth. And if you just do one, just do corporate or just do individual, you don't get the economic impact that Mr. Woodall mentioned from the 80s. That was significant revenue to the government, significant economic growth, significant job creation. That's what we're trying to get at. That's what we need after 41 months of 8% unemployment.
Could I just respond very briefly on the tax reform, very briefly? I think whoever wins the election in November will take up tax reform. I think the principles that are set out in the Republican bill would be very different depending on the election if we take over the House. But either way, I think we'll have tax reform. But I think the principles that are set out in the Republican bill, in many cases, are either very vague or are too explicit. Having two...
that one, even by Washington speak, is unusual.
No, some of them are very vague. They just talk about certain things. For example, going over to a territorial, that's vague. You have to fill it in. And there is no straight territorial tax system in the world. They're all hybrids. What isn't vague is going down to 2 tax brackets, 10 and 25. And you can be assured if we take over that that will not be the standard that we use, because it would lead to a huge tax increase, as I said, for very wealthy families, $330,000, and also would have an immense impact to carry that out on the mortgage interest deduction, on health care exclusion, on the education provision, on state and local taxes. Mr. Woodall, I didn't answer your question as to who would be impacted by the removal of that provision. I don't think we have all the data on that, but we do have the data on some of them, and it would very much hurt the middle class. So we're going to take up tax reform, whoever chairs this committee, but it will be very different depending on who chairs it.
Could I just respond?
Yes.
I have also introduced a draft territorial bill that is not incorporated into these principles, that has been public since October, that has received a lot of comment on both in hearings as well as informally. And so it's specific. It has several different types of base erosion, so how we prevent companies from going to the lowest tax jurisdiction, for example. But this is where the rest of the world is. We're competing with the entire world, and so we need to look at a new way of our international tax policy. And so that is, there are ideas out there that have generated a lot of discussion, a lot of support. So, but again, we want the committees to draw up these bills. This is going to be an exercise that the committees do, and that's both in the Senate and the House. And the Senate doesn't have to wait for us to begin. They can start on day one next year as well. Their deadlines are different because, under the Constitution, the House must act first, and so we would be the first body to act. That's why the process is set up that way.
What I like to hear is the fact that it's going to be an open process. So even though you have the framework laid out, and, Mr. Levin mentioned about how some are defined, some aren't so defined, but it's a framework for you to work within. So you can have honest debate in regards to what the final legislation actually looks like. Correct me if I'm wrong. It gives you the opportunity to craft it so everybody has the input, so we don't know what the final legislation is going to look like.
Well, the structure and framework, as you refer to it, is very much what was developed in Simpson-Bowles. And I was on the Tax Policy Committee on that with Senator Kent Conrad. And what we're trying to do is get to a point where if the rate is zero and there's nothing, and then there are preferences that there's bipartisan consensus we must have for the good of the country or for longstanding policy, then the rate goes to another level. We think that you can do pro-growth tax reform, not ending all preferences, at 25%. But if there are many of those preferences that are going to be added back in, the rate will not be 25%. But we think that's the structure, so people understand as they're supporting and voting for things, the cost, if you will, in terms of rates. Certainly on the business side, many people have come and said, we want 25. And what we think and they're willing to give up a lot. What we think it's important to do is try to have parity between corporate, pass-through, and individual, so that you're not in the form just because tax policy tells you that. You're in that form because your business model suggests that, and that you're not penalized because you're a big company and you get a different rate than some individual out there. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about business taxes. We have a loss carry forward, so if businesses had losses in 2008 and they carried those losses forward, they might not pay any taxes in a later year. We need to look at all of that and say, is that still the approach we want to take, given the tremendous misunderstanding it has out there with the public?
Mr. Nugent, you can be assured, whoever chairs the Ways and Means Committee, I think I can give you this assurance, it will be an open process.
Well, that would be different than it has been in the past. Am I correct?
There are lots of problems with the...
Is that correct? I mean, it was different in the past.
Look,
I'd like to move forward.
Yeah.
We want to move forward with an open
Well, and I think that's where we need to go.
I think 86 was an open process in a real sense.
Okay. One of the things that my good friend from Georgia, Mr. Woodall, brought up was the fair tax. I'm a co-sponsor of that. Obviously, I wish the discussion was strictly on that issue, but it's not. When I'm back in the district, I'm talking to my small business folks that are all S corps, those that are going to be hit by a tax increase. If we were to do what our friends on the other side of the aisle would like us to do, they're the ones that are actually creating jobs. And I come from a district that has, double-digit unemployment. And so when I hear people talk about the ability, small businesses, I don't care if it's one job. That's one more person in my district that actually can get up and go to work, feel like they're accomplishing something, and come home to their family. When I have those same small businesses, and I'm not talking just 20 employees, I'm talking 200, 300, 400 employees, that are those types of corporations that are going to get hit with a tax increase when we can least afford it on those job creators. So I don't know if Ernst & Young got it right, got it close, or way off the mark, but I will tell you in my district, in those small corporations that would see a tax increase, I will tell you that we would see a loss of jobs, not an increase of jobs. And with that,
Mr. Nugent, I just want you, I've given you the joint tax analysis that 97% of of businesses, small businesses, would receive a full tax cut. That's their analysis. 3% would not, and of that 3%, they're not all small businesses. The Joint Tax Committee did the best, and I think it is a mistake for any of us to take an example of one or two and ignore what Joint Tax says is true of the 97.
Mr. Lavin, I wouldn't want, and I don't doubt their analysis, but all I can tell you is that real people that I sit and work with on a regular basis before I was ever in Congress, when I was their sheriff. These are real people that create jobs. These are real people that are going to, and so any study that I hear doesn't talk about the real people, at least in my district.
The 97% are real people. I don't think we should just dismiss that the only real people are the 3%. 97% will get the full tax credit.
Reclaiming my time, I would just tell you that they are real people. Those are the real job creators. And
it's more than half of all small business income. There's two sides to this.
Right.
He's telling you part of it. The other part is it's half of all small business income.
That's because the 3% have huge amounts of income.
Small business income.
Well,
that's a false.
Well, you can move
anyway
statistics any way you want, and all I can do is give you my take on it. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I have the privilege of managing this on the floor tomorrow. I'll save all my comments for tomorrow. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for so much time.
We will now proceed to Mr. Blumenauer, and he appears to have left. And Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Van Hollen is next, and he's not appear to be here. And Mr. Hoyer and Ms. Pelosi are next. Please come forward, Mr. Hoyer. And I just announced that they are next, and so. Welcome back to the Rules Committee. It's nice to see you, Mr. Whip. And without objection, any prepared statement that you have will appear in the record in its entirety, and we certainly welcome your summary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, Ms. Slaughter, our ranking member. Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity to appear before you, and I will reiterate, I suppose, what others have said. The American people are obviously deeply distressed. They're distressed that when they see agreement, that agreement is not made into law. They hear us saying, well, we're for this, and they hear you saying, we're for this, and they hear us saying the same thing, and yet nothing happens. The Senate has passed a number of bills by votes of over 60 votes, some by over 2/3 votes, and sent them here, and they have not been passed. Here we have an opportunity, in my view, to make a statement to the American public which will raise their confidence and perhaps, maybe marginally, but a little of their respect as well. As has been noted on numerous occasions, I'm sure, we have agreement. We don't have an agreement on everything, but we do have an agreement. And that agreement is that the first 200 are... Let me yield to the leader then, and I will continue my statement after hers.
Well, let me welcome the distinguished minority leader, my fellow Californian, back to the Rules Committee, and to say that you should feel very, very at home. You're bookended by paintings of the Pacific Ocean that I have here on your right, my left, and of the San Gabriel Valley, a California plein air painting here. And so the Rules Committee has changed a bit. We have cameras full time here in the Rules Committee now, and so we are very pleased to have you joining us. Without objection, any prepared statement that you have will appear in the record in its entirety, and we certainly welcome your summary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee, Ranking Member Slaughter, for your leadership and your dedication to bringing legislation to the floor. And it all happens here. I just was saying hello to Mr. Camp, Chairman Camp, outside, and extending my prayers to him. He's such a fine, lovely person. And I hope
Yes,
that
we've extended that to
health
him.
will be fine. I told him to relieve the stress in his life, to take it easy. And so I hope that this passage of this legislation will contribute to that peace. I was listening attentively, both when I was in the room and when I was not in the room, but hearing it on TV. As the distinguished chairman said, the cameras in the room. Just some of the questions and observations that were being made by members and by our distinguished chairman, Mr. Camp, and ranking member, Mr. Levin. And I thought, we're sitting at this table, and around this time across our country, people are sitting at their kitchen tables, having dinner, finishing dinner, and part of what they will be talking about is how they are going to make ends meet. How do middle-income families in our country address the uncertainty that they see in our economy? And as I listened to Mrs. Fox's, Congresswoman Fox's questions about growth, and I heard the chairman say that growth was so important, I think it is important to go back to some of the history that Mrs. Fox asked about of Mr. Levin. And that is to say that in 1993 we passed an economic bill that did increase taxes. We needed revenue, and we needed growth, and we needed to reduce our deficit. And that is exactly what happened. So there was an occasion where increase in taxes created an atmosphere where the private sector, where most of these jobs are created, could create over 20 million jobs and take the deficit down to a place where it was on a trajectory of $5.6 trillion to be in surplus, which quickly was turned around under a new president, President Bush, with Bush tax cuts and other things like the Medicare prescription drug bill and 2 unpaid-for wars. But just starting with the tax cut, which turned that around to a $5.5 trillion trajectory to deficit. An $11 trillion swing. Mr. Hoyer knows these facts and figures better than anybody. $11 trillion swing, unheard of in our country. And so I reference it here because you asked, Mrs. Fox, but also because you're asking us to go right back to how we got in this fix in the first place. Tax cuts at the high end, which do not create jobs, which increase the deficit, and on top of it, took us to a brink of recession, as well, deep recession, as well as a meltdown of our financial institutions. That lack of revenue that sprang from the financial institution meltdown contributed to the deficit as well. So that's where the deficit came from. Tax cuts for the wealthy, giveaway on the Medicare prescription drug bill, 2 unpaid-for wars, meltdown of the financial services industry, therefore a reduction in revenues coming in to the Treasury. Some disagreement on what supervision should have been there or not. But I don't think there's any disagreement, as Mr. McGovern said, on the fact that we all think middle-income Americans should have a tax cut. Those making up to $250,000 a year should get a tax cut. If we just pass what we agree on, and that's what people don't understand, why can't you just do what you agree on and then continue the conversation on the rest? $250,000. Now, what does that do? Between 250 and above, you save, if you go down this path the President is proposing, you save $1 trillion. $1 trillion. Or you borrow $1 trillion from the Chinese and others in order to fund that debt. But let's get back to that kitchen table. What does that mean to me if I'm a middle-income person in our country, or a senior, or a person trying to put
put families through schooling. The uncertainty as to their job, their income, whether they're going to be able to send their kids to college, whether they're going to hold on to their home, the value of their pensions, it means everything. Because the uncertainty that is out there for the economy brings uncertainty to that kitchen table. And in order to reduce the deficit, I believe you do have to have growth. So we want to watch our investments carefully so they produce jobs, help create jobs, help the private sector create jobs. Also, that brings revenue to the Treasury. Now, at $250,000 a year, the money that is in the pocket now of the middle-income people is money that they will spend. They will spend that money. They will inject demand into the economy, and it will create jobs. Jobs for them. Jobs for them. What it also does is takes $1 trillion that we don't have to go further into debt by giving tax cuts to the high end and don't have to borrow, as I say, from China and other lenders, adding to the deficit. So it's hard to explain to anybody why we can't, okay, you agree on this. We also agree we have to have, and Stanley's been singing this tune forever, that we have to have tax fairness and tax simplification. We have to address the tax code in a way that is bipartisan, is nonpartisan, really, but does the right thing for our country. I'm going to yield to him in a moment. I keep referencing him because he's been such a champion on fiscal soundness, fair taxes, and fairness, as you mentioned, Mr. McGovern, that's really an issue for our country. It is the theme of America, the most enduring theme, the American dream. And that's predicated on fairness and taking responsibility for each other from one generation to the next. So I come before the committee to respectfully request your consideration of the alternative that Mr. Ranking Member Levin presented earlier, which said here's a place where we are all in agreement. We all agree that there has to be a middle-income tax cut. Whatever else we have, we can continue that conversation later. But do not hold a middle-income tax cut hostage to giving tax cuts to the high end, do not create jobs, increase the deficit, continue injecting uncertainty into the economy, which is not a healthy thing for the economy, for businesses, and for America's working families. It's a bill that the CBO says 97% of small business won't be affected by it. I think even Mr. Speaker Boehner has conceded that point. So this is about most small businesses in our country. When people come up with that as saying we can't give middle-income tax people something because the Bechtel's of the world, which are defined as a small business for some reason or other, won't get a tax cut. But in any event, let's do what we all agree on. Let's give the middle-income families a break. I just want to show you one chart, and then I'm going to yield to Mr. Hoyer. The difference between our two bills are as follows. This gives a middle-income tax cut to those making a middle-income tax cut to those making up to $250,000. Under the GOP plan, people making over $1 million a year, Mr. Wardall, if you made $1 million a year, you would get $160,000, an average. You and your friends would get an average of $160,000 a year in a tax break under the Republican plan. And in order to help pay for that, middle-income families would, on average, have to pay $1,000 more. So not only are we borrowing to cover this, we're taking from the middle class to give this tax cut at the high end. It's just not fair. And so I urge your consideration of what Mr. Levin came in and spoke for, which is what the President's proposal that is fair,
thank you.
that creates
thank
jobs,
you very
and
much.
yield back my time.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Pelosi. And let me just say that I don't know if you were here at the time. We appreciate your patiently sitting through the first panel. We had I indicated that I'm going to request that it'll be the first time since 1999, when I was actually in this chair, that the majority has provided the necessary waivers on a measure like this to allow the minority to have a substitute in order. It's been a long time since this happened, but I'm going to request that this committee do that. And I
Thank you,
hope
Mr.
very much.
Chairman.
I know the Republicans will join. Do you think you can convince the Democrats on your side to join in providing that waiver? I mean, that's why we're glad that you're here.
You're
in
very
hopes that they might-
persuasive, Mr.
They might,
Chairman. I
they,
think you
they
can
might
do
join
that.
me. Mr. Hoyer.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know what the status on our voting is, but let me say that we have two major problems confronting this country. One, of course, is creating jobs. We all know that will be the issue in this presidential campaign, will be the issue in many of our own campaigns. And the other issue we have, which is very much related to it, is confronting our deficit and our debt. They're the two major problems. In my view, the biggest stimulus package we could
pass, frankly, would be adopting a Bowles-Simpson plan, which would put us on a fiscally sustainable, credible path. I'm hopeful we'll do that. I hope we will do it in the lame duck. I don't know that's possible, but I certainly would work towards that end. Secondly, let me say I think Mr. Camp and Mr. Levin both do want tax reform. I have a Make It in America agenda, as all of you know. If we're going to have a Make It in America, it'll be made in America because it's profitable to make it in America, and therefore we have to deal with taxes and regulations. I think those are both items we need to address. But we believe that the bill that we offer that you're going to make in order, and I thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. As you know, Speaker Boehner had indicated he would do that, and Mr. Cantor and I had a colloquy about that. I'm very appreciative that you're going to carry that out. I think that will be an important debate for the American public. But I would urge my friends on the Republican side to reflect upon the 1993 bill that we adopted, which did, in fact, raise taxes on 1.5% of the highest earners, almost to a person. And I have the quotes, and I won't read them here, from Mr. Boehner, from Mr. Kasich, from Mr. Army. All of them, Ms. Fox said, that if we adopted that plan, that we would explode the deficit, destroy employment and the economy. Of course, exactly the opposite happened. We had a very robust economy. We created more jobs than any administration with whom I've served, 22 million in 8 years. For 4 years, we added nothing to the national debt. 4 years, the last 4 years of the Clinton administration. It was a combination of Republicans and Democrats working together. It was also, frankly, some constraints that Republicans gave and Democrats gave on what we might do. The real issue is, how do we pay our bills? How do we pay our bills? We can talk about taxes. We incur obligations by buying stuff. Now we buy Social Security, we buy Medicare, we buy defense, and we have to decide how to pay for them. Frankly, in the first part of the Bush administration, you jettisoned PAYGO. As a result, we didn't pay for what we bought. And as a result, the deficit was very substantially increased. And by the way, as a percentage of GDP, you might be surprised to know, notwithstanding the ads that are appearing on television, that during the 4 years of the first Bush administration, the national debt was increased by a higher percentage of the GDP than it has been under Mr. Obama to date, as his 4 years expand. And in fact, of course, under Mr. Reagan, the national debt increased by 189%, the highest of any president with whom I've served, as a percentage of GDP. Why? Because we didn't pay for what we bought. That's our problem. We call that taxes. That's what we have, the price of democracy, as so many have said. Here we have agreement. I'm glad you're going to make the amendment in order. I'm glad you're going to give the waivers necessary. But at least we ought to support that. We are offering the Senate bill that has already passed. We are offering a Senate bill that will be signed by the President. And we know it has to be an HR number. But it is at least that step. For 98% of Americans, we can give them certainty. We can give them a sense of confidence that at least in the next year they're going to have the same revenues. And in addition to that, we will not do what the Republican bill does, have less money in the pockets of 25 million Americans. Less money.
in the pockets of 25 million Americans if we pass the Republican bill. That's not good for the economy. It's not good for confidence. It's not good, in my opinion, for the image of the Congress of the United States that has an agreement on a central principle. Let us debate that which we don't agree on. Let us debate in the campaign. Let us take it to the American people. But let us move forward on that on which we agree, give certainty to our people, all of our people. 100% of our people will not have any tax increase on their first $250,000.
Well, thank you very much for that, Mr. Hoyer. Thanks to you both for being here. Let me just say that by virtue of sitting here, your testimony, I'm sure, is going to evoke some response from our members. Under the rules of the House, every member of this committee is entitled to ask questions of you. And so I'm going to ask you to come back at the beginning of the third vote because, excuse me? Well, let me just say, all time has expired and we're down to a few people having not voted on the House floor, and we have a total of 3 votes. And so what I'm going to do is recess the committee, and then, so it'll just be about 15 minutes, and then we'll come back. And I know that based on this testimony, there are going to be some questions. I understand that people have obligations, but under the rules of the House, every member of this committee now, by virtue of you having testified, is entitled to the opportunity to ask you questions. So I'm going to ask you to come back. And so let's go downstairs and vote. At the beginning of the third vote, which should be in just a few minutes, we'll come right back up and proceed. Committee stands in recess.
I'll come back after. That is a great thing. How do we pay the bills? Because that's the question people are asking themselves. How am I paying my bills? I don't want to start this.
No, I think the rule doesn't tell them when, but I'm assuming that they will do HR 8 and go all the way to final passage and then do the other bill Wednesday. We're thinking about stretching HR 8 over to Thursday. If the farm bill fell apart, I think it's hard to hold it back for the HR 8 tomorrow and then the other one. That's based on the yeah, I think they'll do both. And so I think they may run, we got to figure out with them, they may run the time simultaneously. Your 2 hours, our Rules Committee hour, and the amendment, they may do, which will be nasty because you know, people have to hang out a long time. But the rule doesn't say,
it's more, we could probably agree on our own to do that, so everybody has to stay there, and they may not do it that way. I mean, they may do our hour, your 2 hours. The rule doesn't require it with regards to how they clearly want to do something. And this was with all of our guys agreed to that. That's what we get. Each one takes about 15 minutes. So we're. All right. See you later. What is it? What does he mean by the rules of the House require? I know the word. I'm going to go down and figure that out. I don't think she's. I think she has. You do that in case. Just tell her. When you say tell you. She walks back in.
I assume she knows your family.
Or I. So, yeah, you know. I'm going to head back. done with this thing. And then we'll be on the whole round. Yes. I'm ready to go back. I've seen it like the street like this. It's floating.
Fired up, ready to go.
I can tell you, I've heard that line before. I've heard that line before. Is that going to be used again in this presidential campaign?
We're certainly going to be fired up, ready to go.
Yeah. Okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, is he here?
Okay, all right.
Do you mind if we reconvene? The Rules Committee will reconvene. We have almost a quorum present. I'm told that we have a quorum present, and as I said, the distinguished Minority Whip and Minority Leader are joining us under the rules. We have a right to ask questions, and I'd like to see if there are any questions. Ms. Pelosi indicated to me on the floor that she'll be back. Mr. Hoyer has, as many of us do, other obligations this evening, and so he's kindly agreed to comply with the rules of the House and come back and be with us for a few minutes.
I've kindly agreed, so the record's straight, to be here. Whether that's under the rules of the House or not, I think is problematic. But
Mr. Sessions.
Well, it is a rule of House, but thank you for doing this, Mr. Hoyer. Your participation speaks volumes about the spirit that you have of trying to not only represent the team that you play for and lead, but the team that you deeply believe in. With great respect to this committee and to you, I do know that you and I had some grins with each other as you gave your testimony about the facts of the case, and I think President Clinton should be proud of the record that he amassed. What I would say is that there were Republican policies, and there were Republican policies which contributed to the job growth. I was a candidate in '94 and became a candidate in '94 as a result of the dismal success and the taking that took place of the tax increase that has been in reference to. The American people do not have a short memory. There was great and widespread discontent against the President of the United States, and many Democrats lost as a result of that vote. It did not help the country. It did not contribute to a better economy, and that did not happen until after '94 into '95, when there was a huge battle that ensued with the Republican majority and the President. So I think for us to say that President Clinton, in fact, gets credit for it, let's give him credit. I'm for that. I'm for fairness. But the timing alone and the suggestion that it was his policies would not be correct. In my opinion, the opportunity for you to be before us today is enormously important, and I have had several discussions. By the way, the committee, I think, expeditiously went through its discussions with our previous witnesses. But I had a discussion with Mr. Levin that was, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, I did submit to the record, that was essentially this Ernst & Young study that was done on the impact, essentially, of your bill, Democrats in the Senate, as well as your bill. And there were many conclusions that were drawn, but among others, employment in the long run would fall by 0.5%, or by roughly 710,000 fewer jobs. We're at the lowest point in our economy in terms of jobs, back to almost 81 levels. And I would be less than sincere if I didn't tell you that, sure, I'm for treating people, quote, fairly, and that's fairness to me as everybody in the tax code, but I'm really all about jobs. In Dallas, Texas, where I'm from, you've been to Dallas a few times, you recognize the potency of jobs to anyone's economy, but in particular Dallas, that thrives on the ability to be leading edge in this country. Loss of jobs is a tremendous blow to not just small communities, but also large communities. It has contributed, I believe, the demise, which we were told some time ago, with the effect of the spending of President Obama's spending plan. By the way, that's been tripled down, not just once, it's been tripled down because it's been added on every year, this $800 billion. And we're seeing what we're seeing. What's wrong with this economic view from clearly one of the leading edge professional groups, economists in the country? Why would you not want to, let me ask you this way, is fairness more important than job creation?
I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, and I would hope that we didn't say that you have to be, to create jobs, you have to be unfair.
No, I'm not saying that, sir. What I'm suggesting is
no,
that...
I don't think that fairness is more important than jobs. I think that jobs are not necessarily more important than fairness. I think you need to have both in our society, in our democratic society. And I think that, but this is not about fairness. As I said earlier, it's about paying our bills. And Mr. Sessions, you and I have a totally different viewpoint.
We do.
And the reason I called these quotes, and Mr. Chairman, I'd like to introduce this for the record. And if you read these quotes of Mr. Boehner, Dick Armey, Newt Gingrich, John Kasich, Bill Archer, Bob Goodlatte, Chris Cox, Tom Ewing, Bob Dornan, Jim Rumstead, Phil Crane, and Joel Heffley, to a person, in 1993, they said if you adopt the 1993 program, the economy will go in the tank, unemployment will spike, and the deficit will be out of control.
And it did.
It absolutely did not.
In 93.
No, the deficit went down.
No.
Went down 4 years in a row, Mr. Secretary. Yeah, I know.
What year?
It went down 94, 95, 96, 97, and 98.
And when were the tax increases
And then in 98, 99, 2000, and 2001, we had a surplus. Two of those were real surpluses. When I say real surpluses, revenues in excess of Social Security offsets. Obviously, the Social Security masked for many, many years.
A Republican
up until
policies,
2 years.
not Democrat
Let me talk
policies.
about Republican policies. In 1993, every Republican voted against the economic program that's put in place. Every one, to a person.
Absolutely.
With the assertions that I've just put in the record.
Absolutely.
That it would destroy the economy. In point of fact, it did nothing of the case and was not changed. That economic policy was not changed. What happened, though, Mr. Sessions, in fairness to both the Republican and Democratic Party, the Republican Party constrained spending, not as much as it wanted. It shut down the government. That didn't work out too well. Not as much as it wanted, but it restrained spending. And what it couldn't do, but in my opinion, certainly would have done, had you had the presidency, you would have cut taxes. You would have cut revenues. And as a result, you would not have cut spending enough to offset the cut in revenues. And therefore, we would have had what we had from 1981 to 1993, exploding deficits and debts, as we had from 2001 to 2008. And by the way, the tax programs that were put in place in 2001 and 2003, almost every Republican argued to me that it would create a robust economy and create jobs.
And it did for 60 straight months.
For 60 straight months. You didn't tell us at the end of that we were going to have the deepest recession. And frankly, Mr. Levin understated the case. In the last year of the Bush administration, you lost 818,000 jobs. Now, you were pretty critical of the fact that we only gained 80,000 jobs last month, net. We lost 88,000 in the private sector, lost 8,000 in the public sector, net 80,000 jobs. You were pretty critical of that.
We were.
It was a 900,000 job better than the last year of the Bush administration. 900,000 jobs better. We didn't lose 818, and we gained 80. That's about, not exactly, only 898,000, but 900,000 better performance. So I say to my friend, Mr. Sessions, that yes, we draw different conclusions. In the Reagan administration,
We followed the policies that were not changed because Reagan wouldn't change them. We did have the 86 tax reform, which was the really only real tax reform that we've had in 30 years. We did eliminate some loopholes. Frankly, we made some people pay more because you couldn't deduct consumer debt, for instance, in 86. So I tell you, my friend, that my experience in 31 years has been that the theory that was adopted in 93 worked for whatever reasons, and the theory in 81 and 2001 and 2003 didn't. Deficits did explode. By the way, you had 16 million new jobs under Ronald Reagan, so that we did have a positive job growth under Ronald Reagan, which is about probably the same percentage as the 22 million, because the economy had grown under Clinton. So that we can argue all these facts and perspectives, but the bottom line is this, and I will repeat it. We have agreement. The American people know we have agreement. You don't want to, I don't want to, at least in this setting, have anybody up to $250,000 or $200,000 single paying any more taxes. Why? Because I want them to have the availability of that cash to help grow the economy and grow jobs, which you talk about. We have the opportunity to do that. All I'm saying is let's do it. The President of the United States has said he won't sign your bill. Now, you may disagree with that. Mr. Romney's going to disagree with that. It's going to be debated. But the fact of the matter is, we do know that he'll sign the amendment that we're going to offer, which guarantees to everybody under 250 as a couple and 200 as an individual, they won't get a tax increase next year. That gives them confidence. It gives them confidence that they can invest, buy a refrigerator, maybe get a new car because they'll have that income available to do so. That's my contention, and we can debate the nuances of which program worked, which program didn't work. I think I'm right. You think you're right. Ultimately, the American people will make a judgment. I will say this. As angry as you said the American people were at the Clinton administration, yes, sir. You do recall in 1996 he was reelected.
I'm sorry, 96.
He was reelected.
Oh, I do. Oh, I do.
And he was reelected because the economy was doing well.
Well, in fact, the economy was doing well.
It was.
In fact, it was, as a result of the fight. Look, you and I, first of all, we enjoy each other. For anybody watching this, you and I enjoy each other, and I know you have a great relationship with many members on our side of the aisle.
I do.
So and
I'm proud of that.
Shouldn't be confused with that at all.
Right.
We do enjoy each other. What I would say to you is that my vast experience tells me, notwithstanding, this is not completely true, but it's at least true enough. And that is people that I believe that make less than $250,000 are workers and not those that necessarily go and create the jobs. And those that create the jobs do so because of money that they invest. And they invest money. And so this is a pure and simple equation about how we're going to effectively use the money that theoretically would go to the government or go to job creation, which is what the free enterprise system is. It is all about job creation. I'm not sitting here arguing against government. I'm arguing for jobs. And so I strongly believe that the most effective and efficient way to use this money that's there in the middle, that is from, by and large, people who make more money, that it would go for the creation of jobs. And I think jobs beats the stuffings out of fairness. And the reason why I say is because my little sister, Sarah, who you know well, told me immediately after President Obama was elected that it was all about fairness, and I said, get ready to be unemployed. Within 6 weeks, she was. In fact, I believe that jobs and the opportunity to have a job creates a lot of American dreams more than just being fair about it.
Mr. Sessions, let me make this comment. I've talked to a lot of people making over $250,000 as you have.
Yes, sir.
Over the last year and a half. They tell me the single biggest thing we can do to create jobs is to get this country on a fiscally sustainable, credible path. And the way we do that is to bring down our debt. The way you do that is to set revenues at a rate that allows us to do that. And if the best off among us, it's not about fairness, if the best off among us aren't contributing, a share that helps us bring that down when they have the ability to do so, we're not going to get there.
Well, let me say this. I was holding some of my comments for the gentlewoman, Mrs. Pelosi, and I still will. But I would say this, that if you're aware of this joint tax, you've seen these sheets of paper as the minority leader or as when you were in the majority, you've seen this for a long time. Joint tax is where this comes from. I believe that we heard Mr. Levin say he believes in joint tax, the work that they do. There is a total over 10 years of some $93 billion revenue that would come in off this tax increase that you're talking about. $93 billion.
For 1 year.
No, that's 10 years.
That's not the figure I have.
I'll have this, if I can get the clerk.
If you're talking about the difference between 250,000 and above, it's approximately $1 trillion cost over 10 years.
The way I read it, you read these more than I do every day, but I'll get that delivered to you
I think
here.
you'll find it's closer to
Well, I'm going to let
$1
you
trillion.
look at the figures and correct me. I am correctable. But my point is that I think that the people who are really trying to make a go of this thing recognize it's about job creation. That's how you sustain Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, not through tax revenue from a few people who are the highest earned income people. It is done through a lot of people who are working so that they quit drawing unemployment. That's the quickest way. And I'll let you correct me because there it is right in front of you. And I know you know how to read these things far better than I do. But if you look at that, it seems to say those tax brackets, that's how much money would be lost. And it then takes it through a 10-year. I put a little circle around it once again.
Yeah, but to 1 year.
No, sir, look to the end of all the way to the right. You're used to reading these more than I am, I know. But see the right for those years, 10 years, see that total?
Yes, but it's only a 1 year effect. So over the 10 years, that's what it costs.
It goes about 3 years on there. It's because it dwindles after that.
Yes, it's only a 1 year. If the bill, they're scoring the bill, that's only for a 1 year tax cut.
That's all this is for.
That's what you argued. That's what you frankly argued
but what
when
happens,
you adopted the tax cut.
What
that
happens
had no
is,
cost in the years out. Why? Because you
see
didn't
it
like the
dwindles.
scoring.
You see it dwindles in the next years, to the next year and the next year. It's actually like a 3-year score.
Because it's only 1 year. Yes.
Well, no, it dwindles.
No, it's a 10-year score. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's 2013 to 2022.
And then it dwindles because
you
the
asked me a
diminishment.
question, Mr. Sessions.
Because the diminishment
I want to
goes
answer
away.
it. It is a 10-year
It is.
score.
But a 1 year
And
bill.
It's a 1 year bill, which
It's a
means
1 year
that the
bill.
$93 billion is only over what this tax cut does over 10 years. If it were a 10-year bill, it would be $930.
Well, perhaps it would be.
Or $1 trillion.
Perhaps it would be, and perhaps what it would be is it would diminish as things go, and if you read down in there, it diminishes as it goes.
Oh, I understand that.
Yeah.
Because you only get the tax cut for 1 year.
But you see it's got 3 years on there, and you see it diminishes greatly over that, even though it's a 1 year bill. I get this.
It's not even though it's a 1 year. It's because it's a 1 year bill.
It diminishes over time.
You and I agree.
Yeah.
Sessions?
I'm delighted that you're here, and I appreciate you being here.
Any other questions for Mr. Hoyer from any members? Ms. Slaughter?
Question, because I know Mr. Hoyer has other obligations that he has to meet as the whip and is quite busy. And you were very kind to come back up, Mr. Hoyer, because there's nothing to compare.
I have respect for this committee and its members,
Well, it was nice.
and certainly for you as well.
Because
Again,
unless
that every
you're-
member of this committee is entitled to ask questions of the witnesses who testify before.
That's correct, but we do not have any rule that requires you to come back.
I'm glad to be here.
The rule states, let me just say, as chairman of this committee, that the rule states that every member of this committee has a right to ask a question of witnesses before the committee.
The rule doesn't, that means people who are
That's what I've been
sitting here
told by
before
Mr.
you.
Halpern
Of course,
here.
we do. We all get to ask questions of someone sitting here.
I'm here.
If you're not under subpoena, and I'm assuming you're not, you are not compelled to stay here and to do that. But we've had people many, many times that had other things they had to do, even committee chairs.
And at that time, what
I
I
can't
do.
tell you how many committee
And
chairs.
at that time,
said,
what I
"Yes,
do is I
can't
ask
stay here."
what I do at that time to
Uh-huh.
comply with the rules is I ask, saying that the member has to leave, Are there any questions from any members of the panel before this witness leaves? That's what I do here, but thank you.
Well, anyway, Mr. Hoyer, it was very kind of you to come back up.
I'm glad to be here.
We fight this all the time. I would think a reasonable person would understand that after 10 years of this enormous tax cut that we have gone, which, according to the administration statement, doing away with the upper end would save us $850 billion over 10 years. That's about $1 trillion. By doing that, we would get some fairness back. And I do have an inordinate concern for fairness. I'll admit that. But the difficulty here is trying to explain to my colleagues and what everybody else knows is that the Bush tax cuts didn't work. We don't have a great glut of jobs. What they said about all those jobs that were going to be formed, they're not. Look where we are today. Extending them another year is not likely to solve any problem. It hasn't solved in the last 10. So I agree with what you're saying, that the most sensible thing that we could do, and I think the most fiscally prudent thing that we could do, would to be pass what the Senate has already passed, get it to the President, get it signed, and then move on with the rest of what should be real tax reform, which I would hope would take away all those loopholes from the Bahamas and the Cayman Islands and Swiss bank accounts, because that's not, talk about unfair. And I do believe fairness matters. That's grossly unfair. But thank you very much. Appreciate what you're saying. We'll live to fight another day. I do.
Thank you, Ms. Lawler. I appreciate those comments very much. Jobs clearly are our number one priority. They are very closely related to fiscal responsibility in our country. And as I will repeat again, I think we can give a certain degree of certainty and confidence to working Americans, and we can also take a step towards bringing the deficit down.
Absolutely.
By passing the Senate bill, which the President will sign. We have to make an HR bill, I understand that, because it doesn't comply with the Constitution, because it's a revenue bill initiated in the Senate. Having said that, if we can come to an agreement on that which we agree, I don't think anybody in this panel apparently believes that taxes ought to be increased on January 1st on people making less than $200,000 if they're individuals, or $250,000 as a family. I think there's total agreement on that. What I said at the beginning is the American people lament the fact that when their representatives agree on something, they don't grab that agreement and go with it because they disagree on something else. We disagree on something else, and it will be politically resolved in the campaign.
Thank you. I yield back.
Any other questions for Mr. Hoyer? Yes, Mr. Woodall.
Brief one, Mr. Chairman. My mother just texted me to tell me the power's out in her part of the world, Mr. Hoyer, and I'm sad for that because she's one of your biggest fans. She thinks you just
I'm not sad for that. That's great.
She's going to vote against you if she has the opportunity, but she believes you're trustworthy and honorable, and she enjoys watching you do what you do. And one of the things
The good news is there are less of your mother than the other type in my district.
What concerns me, I think you've got the best of the politics on why can't we just do the things that we agree on. I think you're wrong on the policy. I go back, I look at GDP growth after the Reagan tax cut, and I look at the GDP growth after the Bush tax cuts in 2003, and I look at the GDP growth after the Clinton tax increase in 1993, and in the 3 sequential years, the Clinton tax cuts led to the lowest GDP growth of any of those other two. I look at individual revenues to the income through the income tax system. 1993 to 1996, individual income tax revenues grew 28.8% as a result of the Clinton tax increases. Between 2003 and 2006, individual income tax receipts grew 31.5% as a result of the Bush tax cuts. And so it makes me sad as a freshman to hear folks characterize these ideas as either crazy or perfect. I mean, clearly, both methodologies lead to some change in the underlying economy. Whether the individuals spend the money or whether the government spends the money being spent makes an impact. But I do think the record reflects that doing it as the chairman has laid out is more efficacious. But my question...
Can I yield for just 1 second?
Happy to yield.
The one thing that Mr. Hoyer pointed to the fact, he said nothing was changed in that 1993 tax bill, and I was one of those. I'm glad you don't have a quote for me, but I'm sure you could dig one up for me as well. I'm the only person sitting on this committee other than Ms. Slaughter who was here in 1993 to, actually, were you here, Mr. Hastings, in 93? Mr. Hastings was here in 1993 as well. So there are three of us who were here. The point that I make is that let's remember what Republicans and President Clinton did with the capital gains tax rate as we moved ahead. And so there may not have been specific changes to the 1993 tax increase bill. There were dramatic reductions in tax rates that took place that played a big role in that economic growth that ensued. And I thank my friend for yielding.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question my mother would ask you, Mr. Hoyer, as she is one of your biggest fans, is this. You say, why can't you? America laments the fact that we can't just do those things that we agree on. I think that you are right about that. And I think they lament that in the context of the health care bill, 80% of which America would have agreed on, but folks wanted to push it through their way. I think they would have agreed about that in the transportation bill. Maybe we can agree on mass transit. So why don't we just go ahead and fund the roads that we can do with the tax revenues that are already coming in, and we'll deal with the rest of that later. I would not have characterized that as the leadership that you have shown over these 18 months, saying, why can't we do those little things that we already agree on? I support that brand of leadership. I think we have brought smaller bills to the floor this cycle than last cycle. Are there still some that are too big? Of course. Will we do better next time? I hope that we will, but the question my mother would ask is this sentiment of why can't we just go ahead and do those things that we agree on? Is that just a sentiment that's going to be here for this tax bill, or is that going to be the leadership model that you and the minority leader advocate, not just for the next 6 months, but for the next 2 years and beyond?
Very frankly, when you say the next 2 years and beyond, I think one of the reasons that somebody observed I have a good relationship with an awful lot of people on the other side of the aisle, your side of the aisle, is because I have, for 31 years, pursued that. This year, I think we would not have passed Export-Import Bank, which I thought was important. Last year, I'm not sure you would have kept the government open if a lot of Democrats that I encouraged to vote to keep government open twice and to make sure we paid our debt. So I don't think it's a question of what I would do in the future. It's a record I think I have in the past. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act would not have passed without Roy Blunt and I working together to make it pass because we thought it was important for the national security of our country. So I would say to your mom, the reason she apparently likes me is that she thinks I'm honest and tell her what I think. She just doesn't agree with it.
And I would never minimize your contribution to those big ticket items. My question was on the smaller items.
Do you have a specific one in mind?
I think we all agree that transportation should have been a 5-year bill instead of a 2-year bill.
I agree with that.
I think we all agree that transportation should have spent every penny that was in the Transportation Trust Fund, irrespective of whether we got more dollars and irrespective of what we did with mass transit.
Right, but when we got agreement, when we got a bipartisan agreement that was embraced by the United States Senate, which we House members know is a very tough thing to happen, we didn't take it. We didn't take yes for an answer. Now, ultimately, we took essentially yes for an answer. We did a 26-month bill, which I think is too short. You and I agree on that. Again, because of certainty reasons. We need to give the economy certainty. We need to give contractors, states, municipalities, and others certainty on what the transportation program is going to be for a longer period than 26 months. I think so. You and I agree on that. Can I say something, though? You mentioned the GDP, and I understand what you're saying. I don't have those statistics in front of me. But I do have these statistics in front of me that in the last 12 months of the Bush administration, we lost 4.6 million jobs. Mr. Sessions says jobs are important. I agree with that.
Would the gentleman from Georgia yield? Would the gentleman from Georgia yield?
Only because I know that my friend from North Carolina is going to say exactly what I was going to say, which is that was the second year of the gentleman's leadership.
It was, and it was the
Congress.
second year in which no policies were changed economically because George Bush wouldn't sign them. So that is, frankly, an irrelevant observation because we could not and did not change policy that existed because George Bush wouldn't sign any of that legislation.
I would have said that spending policy changed dramatically during those years, and the spending policy
not a nickel was spent during those 2 years that George Bush didn't sign a bill having that money spent.
Unquestionably.
Okay.
Bills that originated here in the House under the gentleman's leadership. But that's not, it's not here nor there. It's just, that just happens to, it happens to be a teamwork.
Took two to tango.
It took a team to lose those
Took two to
900,000
tango
jobs.
on
That's
that.
exactly right. It wasn't one man's operation.
And the additional spending that we can paled into insignificance compared to the OMB-led Bush administration's abandonment of pay-as-you-go, which would have constrained a lot of that spending, because the discipline in our system ought to be, and my difference with your side of the aisle has been, for the 31 years I've been here, frankly, your side of the aisle has had not much problem spending money. Its problem has been paying for it. Whether it was the two wars that were referred to, I supported both of them. So let's understand one another. I would have also supported paying for them.
I agree.
And the prescription drug bill, which frankly we didn't vote for, but we embraced. I mean, we're supportive of now. We want to make it better, and we have made it better in the health care bill. But that wasn't paid for. And we just can't go on because the discipline in the system is all of us saying we want to protect you from terrorists. We want to make sure you have prescription drugs. We want to make sure you're secure in old age. But by the way, you got to pay for it. That's the discipline.
I would say the discipline in the system, as the gentlelady said, as she sat beside you earlier, is that we all sit around our kitchen table and do this exercise as a family. And the discipline in the system is that you keep that within the family and you don't decide that you just want to spend so much you're going to take it out of your neighbor's pocket next door. That if you don't have to pay for it, you can get your neighbor to pay for it for you. The discipline is lost from the system. And whether it was Franklin or de Tocqueville, whoever said as soon as the Americans realize they can vote themselves benefits, that will signal the end of the republic. There's a spending discipline that must be enforced, and I thank the chairman for
It was Alexis de Tocqueville. Any other questions for Mr. Hoyer?
Mr. Chairman?
Did in fact he read your mind? Did Mr. Woodall state the exact?
Mr. Woodall did state that while our friends on the other side of the aisle want to constantly give Mr. Clinton the credit for all the good things that happened during his administration, 6 years of that administration, when the good things were happening, this Congress was controlled by the Republicans. And under the last 2 years of the Bush administration, the Congress was controlled by the Democrats.
Under that rationale, Ms. Fox, would you agree that the Democrats were responsible for the good times in the 80s?
Mr. Chairman, I'm a little puzzled. I'm sorry I came in late, but I have some guests in town tonight, and I was getting them out of the building, as you know we have to do, and I was a little puzzled as to why our other witnesses not here.
Ms. Pelosi has assured me that she is going to be coming back, and I'm going to I'm going to recognize Mr. Webster, and I'm just going to read the rule here that is before me. Each committee shall apply the 5-minute rule during the questioning of witnesses in a hearing until such time as each member of the committee who so desires has had an opportunity to question each witness. Ms. Slaughter is absolutely right. We don't subpoena members before this committee, but that's the rule of the House. That's the rule of the House. Mr. Webster. Excuse me? I'm sorry?
I'm glad I'm here.
I mean, it says each committee to apply the 5-minute rule.
Maybe.
I'm just reading,
Depends upon what Mr. Webster's question is, how glad I'm
I didn't say it
here.
requires a witness to come back. I said the rule says that each member of the panel has a right to question any witness who is here. Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to relate a real-life story, and maybe from that someone could glean what this whole $250,000 price tag that's been put on the rich, then let's see if that's true. 51 years ago, my father started our small business, and he started it leaving a very good job, and I was 12 years old at the time. He took everything he had, he put it into a business. He took no salary. My mom worked she's a registered nurse. She worked at the hospital on nights and weekends. She was the secretary during the day. I did the cooking because my sister wasn't as good a cook as I was. I was 12 years old, so I did the cooking. We lived in a house that was 1,100 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath. I would consider that just regular. And we enjoyed it, and we grew up. My dad made money in that company, and that's what I want to get to the point. There are businesses today that do the same. Now, he made the same amount at that time as related to today. He bought a brand new truck for $1,700. He charged $8 an hour to come and check out your air conditioning unit. Now it's over $80. So there's about a 10 to 1 separation. So $250,000 was $25,000 in those days. And you could buy things for about the same perspective. So he made that money. He was a subchapter S corporation. He put the money into the business. He never, ever saw it, ever. But he paid taxes on it. He paid a lot of taxes. But he never saw the money. That money he loaned, there was $20,000, and then there was another $18,000, and there was $22,000, and he kept putting the money into business to buy trucks and expand the business. He paid taxes on every dime of that money, but he never saw it. It's still, 51 years later, with my sons running that business, that money is still there on our books as a loan. So the point is, the whole idea of thinking people that make $250,000 is erroneous. Because there are businesses all across this country that take that money, they pay taxes on it, they report it as income, but they never see it. They dump it back into their business to expand. And all I want to do is just explain that there is a different side of this story. It sounds like a lot of money unless you don't see it. And I was insulted from our family when the president said, "No, you didn't." Yes, we did. And there's one story, and it's a story about someone who may have made the same amount of money in these days and these numbers, who took that money, never saw it, loaned it to the business, and created a business that could last for 3 generations. That's the story.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. Thank you very much for being here, Mr. Hoyer. We greatly appreciate it. Appreciate your coming back, and we'll look.
I want to thank the committee, Mr. Chairman, again for allowing in order an amendment, which I think
yes.
And this whole nub of my argument is that
Well, I hope the committee
we can do
will
it
follow,
for these
our
people.
encouragement on that.
We're not going to do it for the rest of the people. We ought to do it for the 98% that we can do it for, because we agree on that.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being here, and we'll look forward to Ms. Pelosi's return in just a few minutes. She said she would be back for questions for the committee. And let me just say again that it's very clear that, and what I'm trying to do is guarantee the rights of the members of this committee to ask any of our witnesses questions, which is what this rule directs us to do. And so I'm now happy to recognize my California colleague, Ms. Lee. Without objection, any prepared statement that you have will appear in the record in its entirety, and we welcome any brief summary that you might provide us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd also ask that Representative Ellison's statement be included.
Without objection,
in
Mr.
the
Ellison's
record.
statement will appear in the record.
Thank you very much. And I will just summarize his statement. And of course, he is highlighting the fact that middle-class individuals would see, middle-class families and individuals would see tax hikes under Chairman Camp's plan. Also, the deficit, of course, would increase, and I think you have all of the numbers. He's laid out the facts and figures in his statement, but that's the basic focus of his statement, which I agree with. He's doing this presentation on behalf of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, along with Congressman Raul Grijalva. And I just wanted to say, and I was listening to the testimony and the comments earlier from Mr. Webster about his family's business, and I agreed. I was a business owner for 11 years, and I had to work really hard. It was almost pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but I never could have done that had it not been for government support and the SBA and other government agencies that were established to help small businesses, to help minority and women-owned businesses, and I never could have I could not have grown my business. I could not have employed up to 400 people at any given time had it not been for the support and the assistance and the tax assistance and the government assistance through a variety of federal agencies that really was there for me and really helped me in providing that opportunity. And so, you know, opportunity is what it's about, and I think that's what most business owners want, is the opportunity and a level playing field. Also, let me just say, I'm served currently as a co-chair of the Out of Poverty Caucus, and I'm really dismayed and concerned about the fact that poverty is rising and high unemployment continues to permeate our country. When you look at poverty rates in communities of color, continue to rise, and efforts now that would slash programs that would protect the health and well-being of millions of low-income and working poor families is really a cause for concern. And I think we need to also focus on not only what this H.R. 8 would do to the middle class, but also for those aspiring to the middle class. And of course, as has been stated earlier, it would saddle our nation with $1 trillion more in deficits. It would give away, once again, nearly $1 trillion to the wealthiest Americans, while it slams low-income and working poor families by leaving them, quite frankly, out in the cold. You know, writing this check, $160,000 on average to every millionaire in America, you know, I hope that it's not done in an effort to protect you forgot to protect the 13 million low-income families and nearly 26 million children from a massive tax increase. I don't know how we can actually, and how you can justify doing that when so many children would be hurt from this tax increase. The failure, for example, to extend the vital expansions of the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit, that would raise taxes for millions of struggling families. And I know all of you have people in your district who you want to protect from this tax hike. These programs have kept 1.6 million people out of poverty in 2011. And so failing these families would really push hardworking men and women and their children back into poverty, because we know that many poor people are working. They're working poor. Again, by giving tax breaks to the wealthiest 2% of Americans, that's just basically not fair. The wealthiest Americans must be asked to pay their fair share and to invest in the future success of all Americans, not just the wealthy few. Finally, let me just point out, once again, we've exempted, or you've exempted, the Republican majority tax cuts for the super rich from all of the budget constraints under pay-as-you-go, yet repeatedly citing PAYGO when you attack the critical nutrition benefits like SNAP and WIC, and even as more American families face hardship and hunger. PAYGO and the deficit seem to be the only concern of the Republican majority, while at the same time cutting funds for education for the poor, housing for the poor, and all of the safety net programs that keep American families from falling into levels of poverty that we have not seen before us. And so I hope that you recognize that by giving away nearly $1 trillion to the super rich, they're getting a free pass, and more people are going to fall into poverty. And I hope that this committee really takes that into consideration.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lee. We very much appreciate your being here. And as I've said earlier, I'm going to encourage this committee to make an order the Democratic substitute on this measure, and I feel very confident we will. Are there any questions for Ms. Lee? Mr. McGovern.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to thank Ms. Lee and Mr. Ellison and others in the Progressive Caucus for not being afraid to sail against the wind, especially given the climate in this Congress. And for speaking up for those who don't have a big lobby here, who don't have big PACs, but who nonetheless are important, and unfortunately become invisible in this Congress. I mentioned at the beginning that I was head of the Agriculture Committee, markup of the Farm Bill, where they cut $16.5 billion out of food and nutrition programs because we have a deficit problem. 3 million people are going to lose food as a result of that, and we have a deficit problem. We all got to make tough choices, and here we are talking about the deficit, about the need to make tough choices, and there's no tough choices on the Donald Trumps of the world. So when people tell pollsters that they hold this Congress in such low esteem, it is because they think our priorities are all screwed up. That we can't come to an agreement on on a universal tax cut on the first $250,000 of income for everybody, even Donald Trump, and that it's being held hostage to make sure that these special tax breaks for the very wealthy are protected. I think people are really fed up. But I appreciate you being here and hope that you'll continue to speak out. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here, Ms. Lee. We very much appreciate it. That will conclude the hearing. The chair will be in receipt of a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 6169, the pathway to job creation through a simpler, fair Tax Code Act of 2012 structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour debate on the bill equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Rules, and 2 hours of debate on the subject of reforming the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Ways and Means. The rule waives all points for or against consideration of the bill and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points for or against provisions in the bill. The rule makes an order the amendment in the nature of substitute to H.R. 6169 printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report if offered by Representative Slaughter of New York or her designee. The amendment shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for 20 minutes, equal divided and controlled by the proponent. Opponent shall not be subject to amendment, shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. Rule waives all points for or against the amendment printed in Part A of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 8, the Job Protection and Recession Prevention Act of 2012 under a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair, ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means. The rule waives all points for or against consideration of the bill and provides it shall be considered as the rule waives all points for or against consideration of provisions in the bill. The rule makes an order the amendment in the nature of substitute H.R. 8 printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report if offered by Representative Levin of Michigan or his designee. The amendment shall be considered read, shall be debatable for 20 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the proponent. Opponent shall not be subject to an amendment, shall not be subject to demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment printed in Part B of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instruction. Section 3 provides that on any legislative day during the period from August 3rd, 2012 through September 7th, 2012, the journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved. B, the chair may adjourn the House to meet at a date and time within the limits of Clause 4, Section 5, Article 1 of the Constitution. And C, bills and resolutions introduced shall be numbered, listed in the congressional record, and, when printed, shall bear the date of introduction but may be referred at a later time. Section 4 authorizes the Speaker to appoint members to perform the duties of chair for a duration of period addressed by Section 3. Section 5 provides that each day during the period addressed by Section 3 shall not constitute a calendar day for the purpose of Section 7 of the War Powers Resolution. Section 6 provides that each day during the period addressed by Section 3 shall not constitute a legislative day for the purpose of Clause 7 of Rule 13. Section 7 provides that for each day during the period addressed by Section 3 shall not constitute a calendar or legislative day for the purpose of Clause 7C1 of Rule 22. Section 8 authorizes the Speaker to entertain motions to suspend the rules on the legislative day of August 2nd, 2012. Finally, Section 9 waives the requirement of Clause 6A of the Rule 13 with respect to any resolution reported through the legislative day of August 2nd, 2012.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. I think that we understand what we're doing here with the tax bills. We have the expedited procedure measure, which we reported out of this committee last week, and we obviously, so that we can have time to comply with that April 30th deadline next year, have a one-year extension of the present tax law. And we do, as I have said in this rule for the first time since 1999, on a tax bill, provide waivers necessary so that the Democratic substitute can be made in order. We also have the substitute made in order offered by the distinguished ranking member of this committee as well to the expedited procedures bill. And then we have the other housekeeping provisions that will allow for same-day consideration and allow us for a suspension authority to continue, which is, as we all know, the norm as we're headed into a 5+ week period of time when the House will not be in session. Are there any amendments to the rule? Mr. McGovern.
I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment to H.R. 8 by Representative Blumenauer, number 3, which would restore estate tax relief in 2013.
Heard the motion of the gentleman. The vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter. Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis. Mr. Chairman.
No. And Mr. Clerk,
Mr. Chairman,
total?
no. 3 yeas, 8 nays.
And the amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? If not, the vote occurs on the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. And clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, aye. Ms. Fox. Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, aye. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, aye. Ms. Slaughter. Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, aye.
And Mr. Clerk, the total?
8 yeas, 3 nays.
And we've just reported out a rule that for the first time since 1999 provides waivers to the Democrats to allow their substitute to be considered. And for the majority, Mr. Scott will be managing this measure, and Ms. Slaughter for the minority. This should be the last. We don't anticipate any more meetings this week. I hope this is our last meeting. Hope everyone has a great August. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.